Ooh. Okay, well, I think we're live.
Yeah.
I think they're on COVID related. But yeah, we're live. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So nice to see everyone. It's March 9th, 2024, another Saturday preschool for philosophy and Black liberation. And I just wanted to welcome Maurice, who actually came to was at the Central Branch of the Free Libraries reading group that we just began this week.
Everybody.
So happy to hear. And then today we're gonna talk about what I just said, which is the reading groups began this week. And so we'll get updates from the reading groups that started this past week and just mention the ones that will begin this coming week. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we read James Baldwin and finally talk about the upcoming event, April 4th, which is the next event in the Year of James Baldwin. So,
And could we also include, because we met with certain people, maybe other reading groups emerging as we go forward?
Yeah, so we'll talk about more reading groups beginning, and then we'll have conversation around how we're reading James Baldwin. But so the first reading group that began was past Tuesday at South Philly High School, and that's Brandon and Alice are there. So I'm gonna let Alice go first, and then we can go chronologically through the different reading groups.
So to start, at South Philly High School, our first meeting was this past Tuesday, and I'm actually still trying to make sense of what had happened. But I think to start things off, I probably told some people how it was Tuesday after class from about 3 to 4:30. And then when I got home after that hour, I completely knocked out because there's so much to make sense of and so much to learn. And specifically, it is, I think for many of us, there is this question of what is the situation of young people in this country or growing up in this country, given the crisis. And when I say crisis, South Philly High School is also very particular in that it is in South Philly. It's an area that is poor. It's also diverse, like racially and ethnically. And so Brandon and I were facilitating, had our first meeting. The group that came largely were students that Brandon had a relationship.
Where can I sit?
Sit right there.
It was a group that Brandon was familiar with, knew most of his students were from his homeroom. It was, I think, about like starting from about 15 students who came, like 15, 20. And over the course, some had gone to other after school activities like sports, and then others also stayed as well. I think our goal in that first class was really to provide an introduction to the Year of Baldwin, to let the students know that they're also part of a larger literacy campaign in the city of Philadelphia. And the other part really was to build a relationship with students, because as we've heard from various members of the free school, friends of the free school, young people are in a situation where they don't necessarily trust many people, particularly adults and other quote, authority figures. And so much of that was, I think we built off of the relationship that Brandon had with the students. And then from there also building off of the relationship that Brandon had, and then getting to know the students better, especially in the framework of the Year of Baldwin. Brandon had mentioned this is the first time he had done any sort of after school activity or stayed after school. And so the mindset was also different, where when you're in class, there's homework, a certain curriculum, if there is a curriculum, but the students are there mandatorily. But in this after school piece, it was very much of getting to understand like, who are these students, the education that they're not receiving in school, and what they also expect of their education. Why are they there? And so this group, like I mentioned, about 15 to 20, and many different kinds of students showed up. And it was evident also in the icebreaker activity we had with them, where we said, choose a song that best represents you. And you had the full range. And I like go through this because there's a lot to make sense of. Okay, because we're asking the question of where are young people today? And they're very similar in many ways. And then there's also unique ways in which they're responding, making sense and meaning of it. But it was clear that they are thinking. Like young people are thinking, and there's a spectrum where some people are more reflective and thoughtful, and others it's more of a nibbling at there's something going on, because Brandon and I approached it very similarly, where talking about the meaning of Baldwin, and then also making it personal too, where we know young people are alone and told that they won't amount to anything, don't believe that there's a future for them. And when we said these things, you actually heard the students responding. And I guess to end things off, that was the first meeting, and I'm very much looking forward to the weeks to come, because I think in the beginning, we got students, we had pizza, and so you bring all sorts of people and you see like who really stays and wants to learn. But where I'll end is at the end, we've had this discussion question to the students, which is, what do you hope to see, learn in the weeks to come? And I've told individuals here some of the anecdotes, but it was really positive. And I do think high school is very unique in the sense that there are all these competing forces, right? You want to be cool, you want to be accepted, you want to have friends. And I guess that's still true of adults, but I think it's intensified. But at the end, it was a smaller group and they were much more vulnerable. And I told you this, which is there was this young, tall, ginormous Black kid, and he said, and he said it in a much more eloquent and moving way than I did. But he said, Baldwin was a Black man growing up in a time that's more difficult than mine. And I don't even know if that's necessarily true, because it's different. And I do think kids nowadays face a crisis. But he said, I want to learn Baldwin because I intend to live.
Yeah.
And
That
was deep. And I completely didn't expect it, because I didn't know anything of young people. I mean, we have certain hypotheses, but what that told me essentially is that he recognizes that he's a young Black man growing up in this country, and he knows what that means. Yeah. Meaning it's not necessary or not granted that he will live, because many are dying. And for him to make a connection between ideas and Baldwin and history to living was not something I expected. And then there's also other children too, where there's a younger Black woman, and she said, I appreciate this because it's positive. And what she's saying, and I'm trying to extract from it, is that there's a lot that young children face in the world today that's not positive. A lot of pessimism and lack of life and a way out. And for her to say, to recognize that this is something positive was significant. And then there's also other students, but I think those were the two that really stuck out to me and gave me confirmation that what we're doing is on the right track too. Yeah. That we're speaking to people of all ages, and that this can provide a way out for people. Mm-hmm. So there's many more weeks to come, and I'm excited because I think it's a very humbling experience, and I think I'll also learn a lot from the students.
Yeah, on Thursday, we had the first public reading group at the Parkway Central Branch of the Free Library. And I was really stressed because I was like, you always worry about what if no one comes? Like, what if no one comes, or who's gonna come? And then like the way I am, I was thinking about like, oh, I didn't do enough to like prepare. I didn't do enough to get people to come. And then we had around five people who were not like me, Seraphina, and Doc, and then not Grace, the librarian, who was there. And it was interesting because the library closed. So the free library only just recently extended their hours on weekdays. So like they usually close at 5, which is pretty crazy. Like for like what's supposed to be like the free library of Philadelphia to not be open on weekends, not be open past 5, and only now are they open on like some weekend hours. And like most weekdays they're open past 5. Most weekday hours they're open past 5, except that some parts of the building are actually closed after 5. And so it was actually really creepy because most of the library was dark, like they shut off the lights. And I only realized when we left the reading group that like no one was there except us. I don't know if you noticed that. Like it was just us. And like in some ways I was like, we're kind of bringing, we were the only voices, the only like sense of life in this like big building. And so like ahead of the reading group, Doc and I had met at Whole Foods to try to like prepare for the reading group. And like we ran into one of Doc's former students. It was actually really like serendipitous because first of all, it is true. People in Philadelphia, they do meet at Whole Foods. Like if you want to meet someone you know, you go to Whole Foods. And I don't know why, but it's always Whole Foods. But one of Doc's former students, from Temple, Hakeem, he was in town for like a family thing. And so Doc recognized him, and it was just really sweet. And so then Hakeem and his aunt ended up coming to the reading group. And then Maurice was there. And first of all, it's just interesting the types of people who come. What? Oh yeah, so Maurice was there, and then this young woman named Katie, like who's Asian, she was there, and she was like, "Oh, I just decided to come because I learned the free library has like they are open later now, and like this was the only thing that I saw was happening, so I decided to come check it out." And I think she was like not expecting, had no clue like what the reading group was really going to delve into, because we went deep. We went deep into ourselves, deep into like, this is like Baldwin like, straight up just saying like, this is America, like this is the truth of America. And then Brenda, this woman from she lives in West Philly, she came because she was like, I was listening to WURD one day, and then I heard you on the radio with Emma from the library, and I decided to make this my book club for the year. And yeah, she was really sweet. And then Hakeem and his aunt were there. They were really sweet. And
Matt.
Oh yeah, Matt. Oh my gosh, Matt from North Carolina, who had just moved to Philly, was there. And we only made it through 5 pages. And I'm going into detail because like I'm hoping also maybe some of like my reflections, like I'm just trying to go deep into my reflections too, but I was like, okay, we're gonna read up to 20 pages. I knew that it would be less, but I didn't know how much less. And we made it through 5 pages of reading out loud because we were discussing a lot. And I think the thing that we're reading No Name in the Street, which was published in 1972. And we're starting with the first chapter, which is actually the first section, called Take Me to the Water. And I think I've read Take Me to the Water before, but I think I was really immature. Like I had no idea what I was reading when I read it. And it feels like I'm reading it all over again, like for new. And it's really also different to read it with other people, because something I realized was like, I think I because it's strangers, I really don't like this about me, but there's something really important about like just bearing yourself. And I feel like I didn't do that well, like coming out and like making it clear, because I think what I realized is one of the symptoms I think of this society is you're constantly worried that people will misunderstand you and like misunderstand where you come from and what shaped you, and also like who you want to be. And especially when who you want to be is something that is not conventional to what society has set you up to be. But the thing about Baldwin, what I felt like was really, the reason why I went through who came to is because there's something both really new and in some ways almost tense to me, maybe because I was also stressed, but I don't think it's just because I was stressed, that there's something really both beautiful and new and almost tense for me, where especially like think about it, this is like the central branch of the free library, where people who do not know each other, never would have known each other, like we're talking through Baldwin, like, and in some ways the awkwardness I felt, and it was a really like beautiful reader, but the awkwardness is that it felt like you were getting to know your brothers and sisters. Like it felt like you were getting to know family members for the first time who you never met, and you don't have the language yet to talk to each other, but you're building it as you talk, and you're building it based on reading Baldwin. And there was something really beautiful about that, because also the way we talked about the first pages we read in No Name in the Street is this idea of an autobiography of the American people.
Yeah.
That when James Baldwin writes about his life, when it's autobiographical, he's not doing it to write an autobiography just about himself. Like this is what I went through. Like, yes, it is. It's about his life, but his life and his thoughts is actually him at the same time offering the basis for an autobiography of the American people. And we made the distinction between the difference between an autobiography of America or the American people versus a history of the American people or a history of America. And part of that is to say that, like, I felt like in some ways, looking back, like part of both the beautiful and awkward activity we were doing in that room for 2 hours, and like it was actually a pretty hot room, so like I was sweating, like I was also stressed, my cheeks were pink, and like it felt like we were like, okay, this sounds weird, but it felt like we were giving birth to something together, or like it felt like we were engaging in the autobiography, like we were engaging in the like participating like Baldwin is asking us to do in the autobiography of the American people, which is not defined yet, and it's uncontested, and it's up for us to contest it or engage in it. And in some ways, like we're picking up the pen from Baldwin and like making it right, and making new language and new vocabulary, finding that, like grappling for that new vocabulary to use with one another. And I know, like I have such high confidence that like these people, human beings, human lives, like people in Philadelphia who within themselves as individuals have a whole life experience and way of thinking that has been shaped by history and like the direct experience of their life, that we're gonna like be giving to each other. Like I feel like us individually, like we all hold a world within ourselves, like we all hold something within ourselves that even if just 5, 6, 7, up to 10 people may not seem like a lot to nonprofits who are counting numbers. Like I need 100, 200 people to show that I deserve $10,000, but that we, even 5 people, 6 people, 10 people, that one person taking our lives and like how it shapes, how other external forces have shaped something internal that we can then shape externally, that we're gonna do it together. And like even someone like Maurice, like, or you, Doc, or like the way dialectically it's all going to become intertwined together, that is the basis of a new America, a new city, a new people, what King called a beloved community. And because I was trying to make sense of, I was like, woo, that was a lot. And people don't give reading groups, like the kind of reading we're doing, the kind of conversation we're doing, enough credit. Like that amount of like, you're essentially like, I feel like in some ways it's like you're entering a relationship with someone more than most conventional romantic relationships consist of. You know, it's like a certain level of vulnerability to like basically say like, you're like you're like an extended family member. You're my family who like I've never met before. And like I wanna know you now. I wanna meet you and like I wanna like give birth to something new. And oh yeah, the last thing I want to say before I let like Doc and Serafina also talk about, because we were all there at the Central Branch of the Reading Group, is like it's kind of what Alice was saying, where before Free School today, I was listening to some of King's last speeches, where he talks heavily about his stance against the Vietnam War, but how he says he's like, I'm committed to keeping two things always together: my opposition to the war in Vietnam, and my like he essentially calls it like my commitment to the struggle for a new America. Like, and he says it differently. He doesn't call it that, but he's basically saying, because him and Baldwin both say this is not about civil rights and this is not about Negro rights. This is about a new America. That's what they say. They're like, it's not like, and it's not, and if you don't get the chronology right, then you think this is just about an issue called civil rights, when it's not. Like the struggle for civil rights is a reflection of a deeper process called like the fight for a new America, and something that's unfulfilled, but like has beginnings way beyond back in history than we like go back to. Like, and but King said something where he was talking, I think, about the Poor People's Campaign, but he said, now is and this is 1968. He says, now is the time for something positive. And that's what like the young one was saying. And he was like, and he almost sounds like tired in the speech. When you listen to him, he sounds exhausted. Like he could not even like give you a certain spiritual, like, you know how when you listen to King, he's so optimistic. There's a deep, realistic optimism he has. And in this speech, he was so fucking exhausted, and you could hear it. But he says, he was like, but you know, he means it, that he's like, he's trying to use all the energy he has left, because this is the fourth speech he made that day in LA in 1968, where he was like, and it was actually the day of the My Lai massacre, which he didn't realize yet. But he said it's time for something positive to take place, and it's time that we take the anger of the ghetto, and we direct it towards a creative and constructive force. And King was making the point where he was like, yes, like it is time also for white America, for all of America, who have never had to deal, who don't even know that there is such thing as what anger in the ghetto comes from, like that they have to face it. And also it's time for something positive to finally take place. And that's actually how I see these reading groups. Like there's something very, like, I think in some ways scary, and that's exactly why we have to do it, to go out into the world like naked, like to go out in the world naked in our optimism and naked in our love, despite how much the violence, and like despite the violence of the city, whether it's spiritual or literal violence, like despite your fears and insecurities of who you are, that it's time we go out naked into the wilderness and do something positive. And it will be awkward, the way like lovers awkwardly fumble towards each other, but like it is exactly the thing that has to be done, and that's what we're doing. And yeah, the last thing is like King made it a point, and you could tell like for him it was like a very vulnerable thing for him to say. He said in that speech where he was so exhausted, he said, I really like this concept that comes from like the African American tradition, which is the concept of in spite of. And like that's how I feel, where it's like in spite of like everything that has been destroyed, in spite of the threats of the ruling elite, in spite of my own insecurities, my own fears, in spite of, we embark on doing something positive. And it was actually in that reading group where I really felt like with like all these souls in the same room, like talking in depth about just one sentence about love, like the loneliness of love, the terror of love, the depth and height of love. That we were like, I really believe in this thing that if we can get a critical mass, it doesn't have to be 10,000, 1,000 people as if it's a march, but if we can get a critical mass of like, I think King calls it like the conscious, the conscious minority or something. He calls it the creative minority.
dedicated.
Yes, the dedicated creative minority. If we can get even just like that critical mass, the creative minority to engage in this process, like it will be a huge leap. It's exactly the huge leap, the like large step forward in what has to be like a long march to a new America, a new Philadelphia, and begins with us. And that's what I felt. So that's kind of how I was processing Thursday. And I felt kind of like people were asking me over the past 2 days, how'd it go? How'd it go? And I honestly felt really shy. I was like, I don't really want to talk about it, to be honest. I'm feeling pretty shy, like about my feelings. But that's where I've kind of landed.
Yeah, I'm going to talk later about reading Baldwin, but as Emily said, she and I met at Whole Foods just to get our heads around this very complicated essay. And No Name in the Street, in the particular essay, Take Me to the Water, is a very complex project. And but the thing, which I'll talk about more later, is the thing of two autobiographies going on at the same time in this essay, which deals with the complexity of things. First of all, what is the methodology of an autobiography of a people? Because, and it's not, he doesn't say it like this, but we extrapolated from it that there's his personal autobiography, and then there is the autobiography of a people not yet born, but conceived, but not yet born. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I felt, as Emily points out, that this was a beginning, an important beginning, and hopefully the people that attended and others, we will share our lives over the next almost year now, and at the Central Branch of the Free Library. And I'm optimistic that good will come from this, and this will be part of the transformation of the city. I think I've the same thing, the same spirit that existed in the high school classroom at Southern High School is not that different from what we experienced at the Central Branch of the Free Library. And just like although they didn't say it like that, student, I want to know Baldwin because I want to live.
Right.
You know, but I felt that was in the room. We want to live. We want to create something new. So yes.
Yeah, I was like, dang, I missed their discussion and planning at Whole Foods. So at first when I came to the library, I was like a little jealous that like, oh gosh, I missed something. And then while they were like talking, we had first gone into that portion of the library that is for public relations, but the public relations portion closes at 5. So, how public. And then, Grace, the librarian, is also like, will be facing something maybe she has never faced before. And so she had guided us also to the lobby where we sat, and they were continuing to discuss what they discussed at Whole Foods, the autobiography of a new American people, or what you had said, of people not yet born. And going through those complexities, I was in kind of the portion just to observe while trying to be less sensitive. And then we went into room 108 where we had the Du Bois Souls of Black Folk reading group with me, Doc, and Tamar. And the room is an interesting architecture because it is a portion almost saved in a sense. Like nothing is really falling apart. it's just becoming yellow. But, you know, the architecture also says something about who made the building. And Grace was telling me, yeah, it's like a labyrinth. It's like a labyrinth in the library, because there's rooms that she hasn't even been to. And there's people who've worked at the library maybe for 50, 60 years who, you know, who can kind of go through the enormity of what the library is. Okay, so then what happened in the beginning that I just wanted to highlight was that Emily had asked us all to go around in the room and say our names. And, you know, people would just say their names. I think Katie was almost the only one who didn't reveal everything. But Hakeem kicked the door open. Hakeem's relationship with Doc was also something that was such a interesting push and pull. Meaning, well, because Hakeem had been at Temple, and then that reveals something about how many people have also experienced Docs being pushed out of Temple and what that actually meant for the public or for Philadelphia. And so Hakeem said, you know, I just landed back in Philadelphia from LA, where he was living, being like a singer and other things, right? And he's back in LA back in Philadelphia because his stepmom or somebody his aunt has passed away. And so he had to pretty much manage the entire funeral. And basically, when he said his name, he also said why he came to meet. And that had kicked something else, which is what you had mentioned, Emily, like to bear yourself. And what was important about that was that the dynamic that creates is a difficult one, because you're balancing, meaning I'm also observing where people are coming from and how people have been able to be here really, or manage their life. And because there's Hakeem and what he bears, right? And then there's his aunt. So his aunt is like a poet and things. And she said that she's like a Lenape Indian and things. And then there's Maurice. And I'm only thinking about who was sitting next to who. So because Hakeem had said what he had said, it's almost like the emotion was released, and everybody had to also answer the question why it was important for Baldwin, how Baldwin is a revolutionary, how Baldwin is necessary. And amongst that, there is everything that a person has dealt with. Maybe I don't believe completely in the civil rights or King. Like maybe I've fallen off of the wheel of life and had to move somewhere else. But now this is bringing me back to my center. Or maybe this is something that I was looking for all my life. At least that's what I had said. When it came to me, I was like, yeah, it's so funny that we asked for people's names, but within the question was also, what is our purpose? Like within our names is what is our purpose? So in No Name in the Street, like what's so interesting is when we did go through almost sentence by sentence to unravel really, or to get to the essence of where not only people are coming from, but also trying to get to what Baldwin was saying. And so another moment was when Doc had highlighted this portion where Baldwin was a child and he was being taught how to swim by his older brother. And being as though that his older brother was his stepbrother, it was his only brother. And his brother had dipped him under the water, where Baldwin, was lost to the waves and almost drowned. And so his brother saved him. And at the end of the description of Baldwin's brother, who had then really removed himself from the family after an argument with his father, had said Baldwin had learned about the terror, the loneliness, and the height and depth of love.
Right.
And then we had to get to really why Doc had even was like, okay, let's, slow down. Let's really talk about what, this really means. And it was a bit of an interesting turmoil, because how is it possible that someone you love can hurt you? How is it possible that someone or you yourself have learned to love somebody? But then what really is love? Like, what is it? And when we had been able to arrive there, it becomes clear that Baldwin, in striving for this new language, is redoing the entire, or in a sense, the essence of the American people's individual and philosophical framework is ultimately different. We have different definitions for these things, like love, for these things like loneliness or terror. Like, what do we really mean? Because it's all wrapped up in the real history, meaning our lives of this country. Like, and what's interesting is that we talked about how
Tom probably wants to speak to.
so it was just,
We'll come back to it.
yeah, I just wanted to mention that because it was how we kind of got in there. That was important, but I could leave it.
We'll come back to the substance of the essay.
Maybe there are other groups starting this weekend, so people whose groups are starting this week can talk about it. I think the first would be making worlds.
Well, let me start by saying that it was really helpful to hear how the reading groups this week have been. And I think a lot of us have been feeling, we've been talking about it for so long. We know how important of a pillar it is for the Year of Baldwin, and how important that, coming off of the event, it is to really meet the American people and actually work these things out. And that it is going to be something both to struggle for, but I love how much you described it as meeting family members you have not yet met, you may not know entirely, but you have to get to know who they are, where they came from, what shaped us collectively, and figure out a way forward, because I think that is a good way of thinking about what we're going into. And so tomorrow will be the first session of the reading group that Shambarta and I are facilitating at the Making Worlds bookstore on 45th Street in Walnut. It'll be on Sundays at 2 p.m. every other Sunday. And preparing for this reading group has been really interesting. And I'll say we've been thinking about anchoring the first meeting in sort of going over the vision statement for the Year of Baldwin. I think really being able to lay out a lot of take our time really introducing what it is that we're doing, that this is a literacy campaign, that this is a literacy campaign for liberation. And it will be, I think, different than perhaps a lot of other study or book clubs or reading groups that have maybe taken place in the past, but that we're here with a political purpose, and that James Baldwin is indeed not simply a writer or an artist or an icon for art, to be digested in certain ways, but actually a revolutionary. And so for us to, I think, take our time and going through the themes of the vision statement that have been put together early in the year, I think will be really good for starting that basis from which we really want to meet people and establish the purpose of this reading group and establish the basis from which we're coming together. And then the plan then is to perhaps read some essays together, and before jumping into something a little larger and longer, in terms of Baldwin's works, that we might explore some themes and ideas that we were thinking about later on. Could be the idea of responsibility and integrity, so perhaps even reading James Baldwin's an artist's struggle for integrity, being able to establish the fact that like what does Baldwin really mean in terms of taking, like if he's an artist and so many people, what does that mean? It's actually, he says it's not so much about an artist itself, but a metaphor for the universal human struggle for nobility, dignity, and overall integrity, especially in an American context, and like what it means to be a Black artist, or what it means to take responsibility and create a new American people, but also knowing that whiteness will be a very important theme for us to go over. So perhaps even going into being white in other lives. That's another essay we might consider reading. It may be, but it will be something we suspect will be a really important thing to talk through, knowing that particularly this is a bookstore that has come to distinguish itself in like the political and ideological landscape of Philadelphia as being, like attracting so many different stripes of activists, perhaps even cultural nationalism, a lot of different ideas, but we're also open to seeing just who will respond to the call, like who will respond to the call of this reading group, and seeing just what can be made from a discussion and what can be made from like this prolonged engagement over a year, and being able to assert the importance of Baldwin in this time. That's a quick.
What's the name of your group again?
It's, well, we can distinguish, I don't know if we have a name for it so much as it's that we're another reading group at, for like the People of Philadelphia read James Baldwin. And it'll be at the Making Worlds bookstore at 210 South 45th Street. So you're welcome to also attend as well.
We're going to be on Sunday. It's going to be on Sunday, tomorrow.
Yeah, and we have some flyers we can share with you afterwards. But
Yeah, I'll just add to what Kat, I think you said everything that was needed. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to respond to what you all were saying. I think it was very moving to think about this idea of like you really have to bear yourself. You have to show. Why Baldwin, and why do we talk about Baldwin today? And I think this is why we wanted to start with the vision statement too, because I think the vision statement really secures us in a way, because we are coming at it from the question of we are looking at Baldwin for a very specific reason, as him being the witness to the revolutionary process in America. And starting with the vision statement, because Baldwin has been read widely and a lot and in many kinds of ways, and this is not that's the starting point that to frame the whole reading groups, all of them, as part of a literacy campaign, because we're trying to understand the revolutionary process in America. And I think even this word is so overused today, it has to be made clear what we mean by revolutionary. And I think everybody, there's a lot of people who would think of themselves as revolutionaries today, but not really have an idea of what it means in connection to how do you live your life. And I think the vision statement is really important for that, because of how it talks about a revolutionary or revolution as not a set of dogmatic principles, but as a practice that comes from the people. And I think these are new ideas which people are hungry for. And I sort of when we talk, we have been talking about the reading group in general, when we go about it, I think these are the things that we want to sort of start with by by asking ourselves why we think of Baldwin as a revolutionary. And the vision statement is it is the anchor, I think, which can start all of this conversation. So yeah, that's sort of how I'm thinking about it. And yeah, I mean, I'm very optimistic also about the kind of people who come, because yes, I think we have some some idea about the bookstore, given that we have been to some of their events, and how it really is it does seem to be the the activist bookstore of West Philly. But I think it also means that there are a lot of young and searching people who would go to a place like this, where things are happening every other day, basically. And I think that's the audience to if you are searching, if you don't think you have figured out everything, then we can have a conversation. And I think that's the kind of people who they would be responding to something like this. Yeah.
Right. Something about this one here. You can take this one. Well, maybe we can move to, well, is there anything else you want to
No,
say? Maybe we can move to wooden shoe then, that's on Tuesday.
Yeah, so we're gonna be starting this Tuesday, at 6:30. And just, I guess hearing you guys describe like what you have, seen in the reading groups gives me a lot of confidence. Uh, in the sense that we see that like, yeah, people are like looking for a way to live, to live right and to live for like purpose and to, for something positive. Because I know like this city needs something like that, and we could all use something like that. We're going to be reading, or I guess another thing is, it makes me confident that things could run well, like if we set the tone right, and if we're willing to put ourselves on the table. We're planning on reading the vision statement first, and then there's 6 readings that we have laid out. But well, I think what's important is that we have the first 12 weeks planned. We started really early. We have the first 12 weeks planned. We're going to do 5 weeks of reading, and then we're going to do we're going to watch the Baldwin speech, the American Dream and the American Negro introduced. Like, I think people should also see him, hear him, because there's something in his voice that you need to hear, you need to understand him. And then after 5 more weeks of reading, we're going to watch Meeting the Man documentary. So we have that planned out. I think the important thing is that I think we realize that we are coming into this space with something to offer to the people, something that the people probably know that they're missing something, but they don't know what it is. And Baldwin has helped me, and similarly, I think that Baldwin helped these people as well. So we are starting with the vision statement. We are reading it. That is going to be our foundational piece, that it's going to form the entire framework of how we're trying to read Baldwin and understand him. Because at Wooden Shoe, and I say this because Nathan Blaze and I went flying last Saturday, and we went to a lot of places around Wooden Shoe, and we put up these flyers, and whoever we talked to, it did seem a lot of people were interested in Baldwin because of the queer black man. And the first time we talk about Baldwin, we are going to talk about him exclusively as a revolutionary. We have to establish him as something much, much greater than what everybody thinks that he is. It is unimaginable for a person to record the history of American civilization and society and history in such a way that it has fundamentally changed America. And everybody who is a student or a young person who thinks about the world in some way is part of that changed America because of what. And I know that this is going to be a process, and and we start with the vision statement. We're going to start reading him. For the first couple of weeks, we're going to read essays and then eventually move to his novels. And I think that it's going to be a really it's going to be a process that I'm going to really treasure, because reading Baldwin with the people of Philadelphia would not have thought about it. But there's an interesting thing that happened last Saturday that we went, and it wasn't at a bookstore, it wasn't anywhere that I don't know, my mind would usually expect. We walked into a smoke shop and we talked to this guy who was managing the smoke shop. We gave him some flyers and we had a conversation, about Israel and Palestine and the upcoming elections. And he told us how he voted for Biden and now he thinks he's the worst person on the planet. And he was talking about love and peace. And we said that you should come. And he said, yes, I will come. I have Tuesdays off, I'll come. And that was an experience that I probably will not forget in a long time. Meeting regular people and seeing that they resonate with these ideas as much as we do, that they understand them. So I think that we're going to have a really good discussion. And I think that reading the vision statement would be the first thing that we do on Tuesday. We'll have a lot of questions and we'll answer them, because we're armed with the truth, and that's all we think.
Yeah, I'll just say that was a precious experience, and I didn't expect it. And I think it held true for every business we went to, Starbucks or the Magic Gardens. We didn't encounter someone who had to be the face of a business, and they're like, well, maybe not on the window, but I'll put it up in the staff room. And once we got past that moment of awkwardness, there was an interest. Like when we said, this is why we're reading Baldwin, this is who he is. They're like, well, let me take 3 more flyers. And I think it's going to be very similar to Making Worlds. There's a political assumption at the bookstore, and it'll be interesting to see if we get people from the bookstore in that anarchist community, or if we get people who only have like Tuesdays off or are close in terms of location. It'll be interesting to see who comes. And my sister said she's going to come. I don't know if she knows how much that means to me. But I'm very excited.
Wow.
Oh yeah, because Westfield.
Oh.
West Philadelphia High School.
Yeah, so I'm working with Catherine on a similar reading group at West Philadelphia High School as what Alice and Brandon are doing. But it's different because Catherine, because she's been in the school system in Philly for such a long time, she has contacts at West Philly High School and the administration. So she's been the one who's like talking with like the vice principal, like the administration, all that stuff. And it turns out that we are not able to do an after-school program at West Philly High School because there is an existing kind of organizational structure, like some kind of institution that already does after-school stuff. And so the compromise or the solution was, and this will be very interesting, but basically one of the high school teachers of an 11th grade English class has agreed that one day a week we can basically take over her English class.
Oh,
so it's very interesting because it's different from what Alice and Brandon are doing, where it's more voluntary, because our situation is more like we are literally, and I don't know if this is like my ideal situation, because I wish there would be an opportunity for more students to come, but this is, I guess, like the best that we could figure out. And the hope is that if we do it this semester in this format with, like this kind of smaller group of kind of a defined classroom of students, that could also help us lay the groundwork for doing something more like an open reading group, like what Austin Brandon are doing right now. And so our first meeting, is this upcoming Friday. So, Catherine and I are gonna meet tomorrow to kind of do our lesson planning. And this is something that actually, like me, Catherine, and Alice and Brandon have been talking about, which is, like, while I think there are basically so many, like, at the end of the day, it's like everyone's just like people, like we're all part of like the American people, all of them. But like there is a very specific kind of approach to high school students, and part of it is how do we relate to them. And I think like how do we as in the facilitator relate to them? Because I feel like there may be an instinct, for instance, to just be like, oh, like we are teachers, like we're here to just basically give them information, you know.
Right.
And I think something that Brandon brought up, and because he's a teacher at South Philly High School, was he doesn't want to relate to the students in the Baldwin reading group the same way that he would as like a teacher. So he has to like also operate in a slightly different mode from just like this like when he has like his teacher hat on. And yeah, like, I think that's also something that like is like a larger discussion that we're kind of seeing how things pan out. Where I feel like like part of how I relate to Baldwin, even individually, is like how he allows you to have a conversation with like pain and like anger and with actual like traumatic things that happen in like everyone's life, especially as a young person. And so the conversation that we've been having and we want to see how things go, but I think Catherine, like for instance, feels because she's also been in the school system for so long and has seen everything, basically that happens with high school students, and also she's been sharing data with us about the relative like demographics and achievement levels, South Philly versus West Philly High School, and I think West Philly High School is like 59% Black, and I think I was looking at the data. It was like 20%. It was like maybe 30% ended up matriculating into college. And I think there's like 70% graduation rate. But yeah, something that she brought up though is that like we as I guess like facilitators, like we are very responsible for what happens in the Baldwin reading discussion. And part of that does relate to the fact that like even while Baldwin does have a lot of like anger, like righteous anger in a lot of his writing, I think we're trying to find a line where it's like, how do we make it so that the students feel comfortable talking about themselves and even like wanting to talk about like sensitive things, like actually like bad things that have happened in their life, but not make it so that you just bring all these emotions to the surface and there's no way to actually like process through it, you know? Because I think that's part of what there's a risk about, like what happens, if you just like bring up like this terrible thing happened, like I lost my best friend, like unlocked, that kind of stuff. Like what happens if you just bring that up and then like there's no outlet for it, you know? I think that's something that I was concerned about, which we're trying to work out. And I think something that like the four of us were talking about was like, even while Baldwin has a lot of anger, at the same time, like the stronger embodiment of Baldwin is of love. And I think, like Brandon brought this up, where we have to be the embodiment of Baldwinian love for when we talk to the kids. And yeah, so I'm honestly really nervous about it, partially because like we're operating in the confines of a classroom, which is different from like a volunteer reading group. And I think the teacher's going to be there at least for the first week, so I'm not sure how that's going to go. And yeah, so there's a lot of like consideration, but I think, I think just generally reflecting on what everyone else has been saying about having our met and then planning reading, I think like I feel like like my natural instinct is I think sometimes to be very planned and structured, which I think works for some, like you have to come prepared. Like, you can't just like wing everything. But I think a lot of it would be like having this first like having this first meeting and just seeing where things go, and then kind of being able to be it's like improvise based off of like actually what the students are talking about, and, like how things are. And then I think, I feel like the broader question that I've been like thinking about as people were talking was, like what Emily said in terms of the sense of like awkwardness, especially like the first discussion where like I feel like I've said it before, but I really do see what we're doing, and like we've said this, but I really see what we're doing as being almost not even just in the spirit of and the tradition of like the civil rights movement, but we're trying to develop a new stage of what political activity looks like, while drawing from the essence of the civil rights movement. And I think part of that means, I feel like a lot of our images of like the Black freedom movement are very dramatic confrontation with like authorities, right? Which I think was an important element and an important strategic, decisive element in the movement. But I think the substance of it, which was basically Black people also confronting white people with like basically like a new concept of themselves, like Black person saying to white person, like, you think I am, like you define me as something, but no, like I'm actually, this is who I am, and you have to deal with me as that, and then who do you have to become in order to like for us to relate to each other? I feel like that is a lot of the, like what we're doing is it's not something where we're like being really big and flashy and showy about it, although we want this to be something which is embraced by as many people as possible. But like it's almost like in these smaller groups of people, like Emily was saying, it's like we're all entering into a dialogue where like we have to like discover that new sense of ourselves, and we can only do that by actually like coming together and like working this stuff out, like you guys were saying, like working out a new language for that. And I think that's part of it. It's almost like the tension is between basically like how society tries to define each person who lives in American society versus like basically who we might become, right? And I think part of the what we talked about even at the inauguration and kind of what the free school has also committed itself to is like this idea of the new American people. And like I think sometimes people don't know exactly what we mean when we say that. And I think part of it for me is like one way that you can even say that there's a possibility for new people to emerge in this country is the fact that essentially Baldwin can speak to literally everyone. And everyone can find some aspect of themselves in what Baldwin is writing about. And I think that speaks to the fact that like no matter basically like the assassinations that took place at the end of the civil rights movement, no matter all the bullshit that's come and been piled onto the American people in the decades since then, it's like there's still something that changed and something that has been made possible through and what that movement achieved, and we're trying to like dig in and actually find that source of possibility in each of the different situations in each of the different settings.
Can I say something? Or are we still going through reading groups?
Well, we can talk if you want, but we also have, we can give an update on Lotus if you want. We have updates on more reading groups coming. But you can go first.
No, I just wanted to respond to what Jeremiah was saying, because I like that in the beginning you had talked about the Free Library Reading Group through the language of an autobiography of the American people, and also how that's distinct from the American, distinct from a history of the American people. Because something that we were talking about when we started reading Just Above My Head, which was Baldwin's final novel, published in 1979, and the Wednesday Reading Group is this idea of like a modern language, which is also the idea of the last white nation, because Herbanuri and I were also talking about the last white nation idea again. And I wanted to read this line from the Notes on the House of Bondage, which is 1980. So this is all toward the end, like, because I think Baldwin passed in 1987. Yeah. And he says, and I think we used this on God's Revolutionary Voice, the t-shirt in 2018 maybe, or 2017. He said, The irreducible miracle is that we have sustained each other a very long time and come a long, long way together. We have come to the end of a language and are now about the business of forging a new one. For we have survived, children, the very last white country the world will ever see. I think I'm still trying to understand that last line because he's saying, he's looking back now, having witnessed the movement, having witnessed the assassination of King, and he's saying, we have survived, children. Like, the implication that actually something has been survived at this stage, and now what must be forged, like metal on metal, what must be forged from the fire is like the business of a new language, a new articulation,
Yes.
a new brotherhood. And
Yeah.
it's very part and parcel with also what King was saying at the end of his life about how now we live in a world house, whether we like it or not, or now the world house must be achieved. There must be a beloved community. Because even like also in a 1979 interview, Baldwin says, when I began, Black literature was something that articulated the African American, the Negro experience. Now, Black literature is something for Africa. It is something for India. He says that explicitly. He was like, whether we like it or not, the American contradiction is the world contradiction. And so when America becomes the last white nation, the world will become like the world house.
Yeah.
You know, there will be a universal brotherhood. And so I just wanted to underscore that point a lot because I think this is also the evidence of so much of what we have seen through the Lotus reading group since we started reading in September. And I also like I would rather that to hear what like Purba and Nuri say about Lotus, but I will say that this morning I got a message from one of the students who had been coming to Lotus all of last semester. She's Chinese, but she's from Australia, I think, or maybe she was from New Zealand. I don't remember. And so she had only attended for a semester and then she left. And because of the way that we move, I kind of just forget when someone leaves because I'm moving. But the funny thing that her message proved was that across the ocean, she was moving with us. And she sent me like 7 paragraphs worth of Instagram DMs, which is great because I text like that too. And she said, I finally read The Fire Next Time, and it reminded me of Giovanni's Room for this reason. And she brought out one, and she sent me the whole passage. She said, this passage about the Nation of Islam is so deep, especially because I read the autobiography of Malcolm X like 2 years prior. And it was the passage where Baldwin talks about encountering the nation and asserting an ideological difference, essentially because he believes in a new American people, versus at that time, the ideology of the nation says like, the white man can only become like the white man, you know? And, but he has this very interesting line where he says, because we conceived of our responsibility as different, we would always be strangers and maybe one day we might be enemies, you know? But like, I'm just saying this to say that like cusp, like there's a cusp and we're on it and we're on the frontier and we're going somewhere. And yeah, but it was funny to me that like the student said it so plainly. She said, I wish I could be there with you all. I want this to be in my life forever. I wish I could sustain my relationship to like James Baldwin, this collective of reading James Baldwin together. And if she sent me like 7 messages, so I sent her like 14 messages back to say like, yeah, like we're still together, don't worry. But do you know what I'm saying? Like this is possible. Even this type of relationship is possible because of Baldwin, but also the moment in America and the world.
That's what it is actually. Well, did you want to talk more about Lotus?
No, but
Let's just first let Lotus talk.
But I feel like we've talked on and off about Lotus. The only thing I'd add is that where we are this semester, you know, specifically because it's concretely a part of the Year of James Baldwin in Philadelphia, we are focusing on the civil rights movement. And one of the things that, and this is my impression, is one of the things that always has shaken me, you know, in this country is how little this is studied, how little something that was so transformative for the entire country is studied. And yeah, I mean, it makes me feel a certain type of way about universities like Penn, and what kind of what they think they are responsible to, because it's definitely not to a complete education for the students. And the thing going relating to what we have been talking about, what Michelle was also bringing up, the thing that you see most clearly is that the students realize it also right now.
Yeah.
In this moment, they realize that they're being failed by all these institutions that were, you should have been able to take for granted that this is where you go to be educated, to become, to be introduced into the world as a moral, responsible agent who can do things, who can make a contribution. But yeah, it's becoming clear to the students. I think it's already clear. And it's almost, when we read that essay Baldwin writes about the student movement in the South, They Can't Turn Back. And he says, these students, there is no more compromising. There is no further compromise that you can make with these young people, because the lies have been exposed. And I feel like a very similar thing is happening in our moment, where there are just, you cannot explain yourself, explain what has happened, explain the hypocrisy, the cowardice to these students anymore, because they're not having it. But yeah.
Larry?
Yeah, I feel like we've talked a lot about this, but I'm really excited to basically think of the high school students who are saying like, I want to live. And for Lotus, like, and these college students are saying like, I'm fighting my life.
Yeah.
Right.
That's sort of the level of urgency. But then what is not yet clear is, I think, the maturity of the responsibility. And I think that's what will be really interesting, like hearing from the central branch of the Free Library, where these people have lived lives. And they've like gone on a journey, and now they're sort of coming together and saying, this has been my life. Like, I'm ready to share it. Like, I'm ready to come together. And I think seeing like all the different pockets are going to be like really interesting and important, because basically for sort of the college student, like that time of youth is sort of like still discovering yourself and then figuring out what it means to actually take responsibility for society. But it's not with, I think, the same amount of life experience. And so reading in this group is like interesting because it's very much like education, like discovery. Yeah, I think all of the different groups are just so exciting to say something different about.
Okay, I think we should first finish up the updates, like Zion,
Yes.
Unitarian Church, Mother Bethel, and then, do you want to talk about Baldwin reading, or we could do comments
No,
first?
Let me do epistemology.
Okay, epistemology, and then we'll go into comments, including yours. But I can start with Unitarian if you want, or do you want to do Zion?
Yes.
Zion? Okay.
Well, you can start with Zion, I guess.
Oh, you should start with Zion.
Oh. Okay. Alice and I, and this is really from Alice, when she went to Zion Baptist Church to introduce the idea of reading Baldwin there. Zion Baptist Church is the church that I grew up in. It's where I was baptized, and my family. And so, but Alice kind of opened the door when she went to Sunday service. And then she and I met with the pastor, Reverend Gus Roman, and he was very receptive, enthusiastically receptive to the idea. In fact, he introduced some ideas that I don't think we had thought about, the idea of what you would call in political terms, the organic intellectual. He said, we must have intellectuals that we raise up from children to serve the community, to stay in the community.
Right.
And we had about a 2-hour meeting with him, and we would just, we didn't have words, we just left it. We didn't have words to express how it was, just, we didn't expect that kind of reception. And for the pastor to intellectually and politically understand this in ways that we do, But at any rate, he asked for two of the leading members of the church to meet with us, which we did yesterday. And it turns out, of course, I grew up in the church with both of them. We hadn't seen each other for a long time. And so it was a lot of, smiles and kisses and, what you doing? Is this one still alive? Where's this one? I know you all don't want it that time. But so we wouldn't know where everybody, and so on. But then when we began to talk and, we had to, really, I think they had to we had to reintroduce ourselves, myself included. What have you been doing? What I've been doing, because the question is to be invited into a church, especially a church of this importance. It was at one time one of the most important churches in the United States. And we talk about the civil rights movement and the economic boycotts and so on, led by that church. So, so they had to know where you coming from, what you've been doing, where, to know. But so at the end, they said, yes, we want to read Baldwin here. And we want a Baldwin reading, because we had to explain that we're not set up as a free school with a pedagogy for children. So we would have to deal with, kind of teenagers on up kind of thing. And they said, yes, we want to do this and we want to have it on Sundays after service. And, it's not a small thing, believe me, to be invited into a Black church. We can go into all of that. And for them to say that they want to read Baldwin after service because more people are there. And I don't know whether they said every week, every other, but they were so enthusiastic that it could be every week. But I'll just stop there.
Yeah. I think a lot of it also has to do with, like you had talked with them about also the changes going through at Zion, where, well, one, during the period of Reverend Leon Sullivan, it was this beacon in Philadelphia. And one, there's the decline of Zion, but also the decline of churches in general, because they face a similar issue, or they face the issue of not having young people part of churches anymore. Because you'd even spoken to how for Easter, you had to line up, get there early to even have a seat. So I think that's one piece, which is that there are people who very much grew up in that church. It's important to them. Pastor Sullivan was also, or Reverend Sullivan was also important, deeply important to them. And they're trying to revive the church and the legacy of Leon Sullivan. And I think that's one component, but also that legacy that they kind of rest upon is also the one that makes them appreciate our genuineness and purpose as well. Where, like you said, it's not warranted that they immediately accept us. I mean, I think there's the relationship that you had with them, knowing them, growing up together. But I think the piece is also like the warmth that they've showed us, and also recognizing, because we're different. Well, there are many similarities, but also there's differences, right? Differences in time, and they're rooted in the church. And so there's a lot of understanding to do. But I think the basis in which we're able to move forward is this, that they want to, preserve the legacy of Reverend Sullivan. They want to serve the community. Because we talked a lot about also opportunists who don't. And I think that was a very encouraging conversation and just, and yeah, even when we brought up like, the Year of Baldwin, it wasn't a shock. They were like, oh yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is figuring out, logistically how that works, what day, when. But generally we'll be aiming towards April to start the reading group. So after our meeting with Brent, or after our meeting with the Zion,
Victor.
we actually went to mosque afterwards because I know Eddie and Samir had been going to their Friday reading groups, where I guess I'll pass it to Eddie to talk about, us having Year of Baldwin there, the relationship you've established with them, and so forth.
Sure, I'll start us off. See, I've been going to their Friday study groups, which I think is titled Self-Improvement as the Basis for Community Development. And they've been going through these books that I think Ms. Farrakhan has even written that are reinterpretation of the Bible and the Quran to make it not just relevant to like your life as like a modern person, but to make it part of like a struggle for freedom in a very interpersonal way, because it's stuff that you will think about if you're trying to be a moral person in this world. But it elevates that to a struggle for freedom in society. And so, just me personally, as a young person, benefited tremendously from this engagement and has given me a kind of way to relate Baldwin to the thinking of this powerful force for good in the country and internationally. And the way that I've really thought of Baldwin fitting in is largely, the work that the Nation of Islam wants to do to create new human beings that can create a new country. I think that's what Baldwin is able to do for us as human beings. And really the way that I even think about it is I think of praying, and I almost feel like Baldwin is can be like an answer to your prayers. When you're praying, of course you're supposed to give gratitude to God and all the other things that you're thankful for in life. But at the same time, it's supposed to be a moment of weakness and vulnerability. You're supposed to kind of cry out like, I'm lost, I'm struggling, and I don't have the answers. And I need something bigger than me, something greater than myself to get me out of this. And that's how I read James Baldwin, as something bigger than me and greater than me, as a force for truth. And so, and of course that love that I guess I feel at the nation that's supposed to be, the human as the vessel to share the love of God. I think that's that revolutionary love that Baldwin is able to articulate and express. And so I'm still working out when we're gonna start and what we're gonna read and how we're gonna present it. But I already feel like the relationship is so strong. The common assumption that I feel when I go to mosque is that I'm there with my brothers and sisters to struggle. My brothers and sisters in struggle.
That's right.
The common assumption is already that we need to become new human beings, and that we can and must do it together. I've had nothing but warm reception from all members of the mosque, and I've had a great depth of conversation with Brother David Hassan, who visited us last week, who to me is a intellectual in addition to a revolutionary man of the people. And that's to me representative of, best representative of all the brothers that I've met at Mosque thus far.
I think at the Friday reading group in Nation of Islam hosts, the self-development reading group, the theme of resurrecting men comes up, and they believe that Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has resurrected men in America, and then it is their mission, once resurrected, to go out to their communities and resurrect other men. And something that David Hassan has stuck with me was, there's a battle inside every man from, there's an old him that is dying inside of him, and the new man that he's becoming. And there's a struggle between the old and the new man, and at the same time, the old is becoming the new man. So that's stuck with me, me personally. And also on Monday, Ramadan begins, and the mosque is in Germantown, and my work is a little outside of Chestnut Hill. So I'm going to try to go there in the morning to begin the fast, and also spend Ramadan with Nation of Islam. And David Hassan said that we, the free school, were invited for iftar. So maybe I should explain a little about Ramadan, but it's been a while since I fasted a whole month. But Ramadan is a special time. It's a spiritual time. It should be a time of peace and prosperity. And it's a time for people who are encouraged in Islam to do self-introspection and to pray late at night and to fast during the day and to party hard in the night and break your fast with your community. So I'm looking forward.
Just real quickly, so we can move to like a conversation of Baldwin's epistemology. The Unitarian, so we're at the Unitarian Church, and it was super also serendipitous that we ran into Reverend Abby, who's one of the main, I think she's the first chair, it's what's called, the main reverend here. And I had an hour conversation with her yesterday, and the Unitarian Church wants to be one of the locations of a reading group as well, starting in April, after the April 4th event. And she, every other week, and we're just figuring out what day and time. And she was really excited, especially because, in particular, what she was most interested in is that we're dedicating the whole Year of James Baldwin to the children of Gaza. And she's interested, like for her, she's interested in the idea that the American people owe the children of Gaza something, and that they have a moral responsibility. And I thought that was interesting, that was the thing that really resonated with her, because I think it says something about, like, especially, I think it says something about the American people, but also in particular, like, what King would call the moderates or liberals. And I also think it's like in some ways it's a calling. There's something about what's happening in Palestine that creates a calling to like save your own soul. And then the last thing, she also wants, there's 3 Unitarian churches in Philadelphia, Germantown, Mount Airy, and then this one. And she wants to, because we're dedicating the April 4th event, which we'll talk about later, to James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo, like these really courageous Americans who were also Unitarians and who in some ways, when it was not safe or popular, chose to attempt to become new Americans beyond the confines of what they were born to be. Where she was very moved by that we wanted to dedicate the event to the Unitarians, and she wants us to send the event details so that she can share it with the other ministers of the Unitarian churches. And Yeah, and in some ways, I think it goes back to King awakening a legacy, like awakening like a possibility, like I don't know, awakening a possibility, like a spiritual source that these various religious leaders, especially like the Unitarians, the Mennonites, the Methodists, can tap into again. And yeah, it also shows, I think, like we said when we had that free school about churches and religion, it shows something about like it's like all these different institutions, but like religious institutions are being shaken up like in a blender because of the crisis of the world and also crisis of America, the crisis of legitimacy, where there is no center anymore. And so it also showed me that like Unitarians, like people are asking in some ways the same question of purpose. Like, what is my role today as an individual? What is my role as a religious leader? What am I supposed to be doing? So that was just the Unitarians. And then,
Trip to the best.
oh, okay. Okay, one last update. One more update.
And I just have one other.
Okay, two more updates. I feel like every week feels like a whole year, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay, so last Sunday, so the day after last preschool, some of us went to Mother Bethel AME to go attend service. And yeah, it's funny because I was reflecting on why I like Christianity so much. Like, I don't know. I just feel like I just really love Jesus. I feel like it sounds corny, but like I actually mean it. Like I love the man and I love Jesus. And I think if I were to join any religious institution, it'd have to be a place that loves Jesus too. And yeah, isn't it funny that like Jesus makes me emotional? But so we went to Mother Bethel AME and Reverend Mark Tyler's there and we talked. It was a really beautiful service. They even when they were like, if this is your first service, please stand. And like we all like were shy. We looked at each other like, okay, we're gonna stand. It was like me, Kathy, Alice, 3 Chinese women, and then it turns out 2 pews behind us, there was like a random Asian man who was there too. So it was 4 Asians standing up in a black church.
There was a Chinese woman playing.
And there was a Chinese woman playing the piano. Robert Bell thought was you. And I was like, honestly, that would be a good place to like practice piano. But and that was interesting. And then it's funny because that's when Reverend Mark Tyler made it a point to say, he looked at us and said, you guys must, I think you are with Dr. Anthony Montero, who's also with us. And then he had Doc stand. It was like called him a great fighter for social justice. And then the whole church was like, oh my God, Tony Montero. And yeah, they did. Like all the women were like, they were clapping, everyone was clapping, and no, but it meant a lot because I just think
It wasn't all that.
no, they were showing respect, and I think for us, like when Reverend Mark Tyler was preaching, it was interesting because his reference point of what everything he had to say goes back to slavery, and it shows that it's like the beginning of this country's history.
That's right.
And where all the contradictions begin is with slavery. It's the transatlantic slave trade. And he also talked about the point of no return in Senegal that he saw. And it's like, it was an affirmation that in the Black community, which has to be, and it can't just be the chronology, it's a chronology of the American people. And it's something that all American people have not yet embraced, or they don't see it yet, but you have to in order to actually know the path to freedom. And
we think, and I had a meeting with Reverend Tyler this week. He was traveling this past week, and and I think they might want to read Baldwin at their church as well. I know Alice is concerned that we not get too spread out. Can we handle all of this?
Well, let's see.
Yeah, but let's see. Yeah. And the other thing is the Germantown Mennonite Church wants to start a reading group. I'm in some kind of text messaging communication with the pastor. So we'll see how that goes, Wow. But I was saying to Raya earlier that, the churches are opening their doors to us, but I don't even know how to get into the labor movement. It's a closed operation of so-called progressives and socialists who want to dominate, well, they want to control the labor movement and the working class. And so I don't even know how to get it. If somebody knows, I would be very willing to go and talk to anybody in the labor movement. Because, but anyway, that's a whole nother. So that's where I think we are right now. And I just want to mention one other place, and that's Lincoln University, where next semester, in the fall semester, they're going to have a special course on Baldwin.
Oh, shit.
It's not really what I want. I want the university to declare this year the year. That's where I graduated from, and I don't appreciate that y'all can't understand this. But that's another question, So those are
So that's the beginning of the Year of James Baldwin. But I know you want to talk about.
Man, please. Yes. I don't want to talk long. Everybody, people coming to the, reading Baldwin are going to be reading other people's comments about Baldwin in this year, Baldwin's 100th anniversary. A lot hasn't appeared yet, but you can be assured that as we get closer to August, the mainstream media, mainstream academics, mainstream intellectuals are going to be writing about Baldwin. We've already seen one article by Robert Jones Jr. that was in the New York Times, which was completely, well, I won't say completely, but more wrong than right, And I was just reading another essay in Time Magazine online, where this writer is talking about reading Baldwin in a time of an election. But, it's just narcissism and intellectual showing off. So if Baldwin is a great writer, for you to write about Baldwin, you're going to try to be a great writer. And you don't have it like that. So they do more to obscure than to clarify Baldwin. I just say that to say that as we go forward and as we learn more by reading Baldwin, as we learn more in the reading groups and all this type of thing, we have to be secure in our understanding that we have an epistemology, a way of knowing Baldwin that is parallel to Baldwin's way of knowing the world. And it is this epistemology which is not random. It's not just something we're drawing out of a hat. And I think as we go forward, the thing that will be unifying for us in our reading is that we will share a common epistemology, a common way of knowing Baldwin, a common way of accessing Baldwin's way of knowing the world and knowing the American people. And I just want to underline, it is not random. It is not us trying to put something on Baldwin that's not there.
Right.
What is more the case is trivializing Baldwin by taking him out of the revolutionary context that he writes from. And it doesn't take a lot of reading of Baldwin to see it. It's so apparent. The thing I wanted to say about the epistemology, one, that our approach to Baldwin is that he is a revolutionary, not for the past, but for this time. That he is a revolutionary that occupies a place in the modern history of ideas, which is equal to the great European revolutionary and radical thinkers. They had to solve the problems of the revolutionary process in Europe at that stage of capitalist development. Baldwin is writing about the world in the stage of capitalist development where capitalism is being challenged on every front. And of course, for us, it is the period of the decline of Western capitalism and the rise of a new Afro-Asiatic civilizational axis.
Right.
And so I think we have to stay firm in that.
Right.
As you know, as we all know, when you're reading with people that don't know us or don't really know Baldwin, like I think we know him, many people have different opinions, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's why we're going to have to be in reading groups for a year, because the first time everybody's expressing an opinion, everybody has an idea, and that's all good. But then there is a way of understanding Baldwin that is accurate and really finds in him what is useful for this moment in the history of the American people. And I think that's what we're searching for in all these reading groups. And that's, whether it be high school students or people at a church like Zion Baptist Church or at the Free Library, wherever. I think what I'm feeling, and it is a very emotional thing, that there is a common striving.
Yes.
But it has to be, I think, anchored properly. So I just wanted to say that I think I was just saying to Emily's, what was that thing? I said indispensability.
Yeah.
What did somebody say? Somebody said, and you wrote that down, and I said indispensable.
New stage of political activity.
Say that again.
Jeremiah was talking about a new stage of
Yeah, a new stage. And hence, and then when she wrote that down, I was looking at it, I said indispensability.
Yeah.
At this new stage, there's something about Baldwin that is indispensable.
Right.
And we have to define that indispensability. You know what I'm saying? And I think we have to discover it in all of these reading groups, and as we come together to talk about what people are saying. That's what was so interesting when we went up last night up to Mosque 12, to hear the way people would talk. And of course, they talk differently than the Baptists because they're more highly disciplined organization. And and one of the things that I was so impressed with is their emphasis during Ramadan that you have to do for the people, do something for people, but that they kept saying over and now, Mosque number 12, the Nation of Islam, is very different than many organizations, but they kept saying the struggle of an oppressed people. And although they are able to articulate things because of their discipline, their ideology, and so on, I think that is universal. The struggle of an oppressed people. And that's all I wanted to say. I would just say that the young man at South Philadelphia, when he said, "I want to live,"
Right.
that was a reflection of his acknowledgement that I'm a part of an oppressed people.
Right.
And I want to live.
Right.
I want to live. And I think I would just say, I want to live so I can fight for a better world.
Has things I want to say.
Excuse me, I just have to pick up.
On Baldwin, I was thinking about a couple things. But before the updates, I've had this idea of percolating since before the updates, and it just wasn't appropriate to get it out. But I was thinking back to what Serafina was talking about what is love, and how people like the Wooden Shoe were talking about their outreach, and the left that doesn't really get along with free school criticizes us for we don't do protests and we don't do base building, and so therefore we don't do quote unquote the work. But what we are doing by going to the people and reading James Baldwin is teaching the people a new language. And I remember we went up to the Sublation magazine release, and Ben Burgess said, working people don't like language because it's used to attack them. And working people don't like language because language is supposed to be, it's supposed to make you feel bad that someone knows more than you, or someone knows a higher language, or someone speaks an academic language. And what we're doing with the Year of Baldwin is we're going to the people and rediscovering Baldwinian love, or teaching the people Baldwin's language. And what we're doing by that, I'm thinking about when we discuss philosophy, we're re-examining the preconditions, that precondition. And in a way, it's more of a determining that, Olympian type organizing, where you do door knocking. And yeah, that's what, made me think about this. The way that when I did door knocking, you have 3 minutes with someone at the door, and they don't really let their guard down because language is used to attack people. And then Serafina said, okay, well, what is love? And once everybody's in these groups and we get over the barrier that people put up from being attacked by language all day, we can ask this question, what is love? What is language? Because, language allows people to put their ideas, iteratively. It's the same, you have an idea, but to put it into language is to concretize it. And that's taking something internal and making it external, but something from the self. And so teaching people Baldwin's language is something that questions these assumptions that working people have made that they've never questioned before. And so in a way, what we're doing is more powerful than door knocking 100 doors, or having 100 protests. And so I think that this Year of Baldwin, all these reading groups are, something that I've been searching as a methodology for revolutionary change for a while now. And I think that it's important, it can't be understated.
Planning for official weeks.
Like, I'll do comments. Should we do comments before we break before?
Speak up a little bit more.
Okay, we have some comments, not too many today so far, but a lot of people say good morning, culture, and we start, Chris Romero, someone named Fireplay, and Mary, then someone named Tennessee that, quote from the South Philly high schooler was really powerful, saying hi Tennessee. And Spark says, Dr. Montero, I really enjoyed you on the Garland Nixon show. Okay, Chioma says that this idea of being naked in our optimism was so beautifully said by Emily. I say thank you. Tempest B asked, are any of the reading groups completely virtual? And I don't think any of them are, but I think we should call one. We'll have them virtual.
So will the Unitarian, the Unitarian Church will be virtual. We'll have virtual.
Yeah.
And then Mary said, wow, this sermon from Reverend Tyler. I'm so inspired by them, you all, and the people of Philly. And I think those are all of the comments.
Yeah, we can talk about the planning for the April 4th event.
Yeah.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, as we had our launch back in February, and with the launch, we've started all these different reading groups, sites as part of the literacy campaign. So the next major event will be on April 4th, and that's in Yep.
I'm sorry.
It'll be on April 4th in celebration of the anniversary of King's speech, Time to Break Silence, Why Oppose the War in Vietnam. So the event actually will be a 2-day event, so one on April 4th. That'll be a Thursday, and it'll be an evening given people have school, have work, whatever it is. And then it'll be in the evening, and then the time will be finalized. It's about like 5 to 8 p.m. And then on the following Saturday, April 6th, we'll have an extended program, like how we show up for free school usually. So we're working on the title. It's a conversation on America's revolutionary future and MLK's vision for peace. Then for each of the days, we also have a subtitle heading.
What was the exact? Didn't we come up with a more exact title?
I think it's
something like what Alice said.
Yeah, America's revolutionary future.
And Martin Luther King's vision for peace.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's what I just said.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Optimism. Yeah. Oh yeah, emancipatory revolution. Emancipatory revolutionary democratic struggle.
Emancipatory revolutionary.
Anyways, tentative title.
Okay, tentative.
So tentative title we're working out. First day, it's Martin Luther King Jr.'s message for the American people. And then that will consist of 2 components. One is a screening of an abbreviated version of his speech, A Time to Break Silence. And the reason being that not many people have really listened and also dedicated time to really understand what King was saying. Then following the screening, we'll have a panel responding to the screening, interpreting it for our times and what it means for our times, given the parallels of when King gave that speech, and then also to our current situation with the multiple wars, and then especially Gaza right now. Do you guys want to add anything?
Do we talk about speakers?
What was the second day?
The second day is Saturday afternoon, April 6th. And that is like April 6th is because April 4th is when King gave his Beyond Vietnam speech, A Time to Break Silence, Why Oppose the War in Vietnam. And so we feel like we have to really talk about King. Like how courageous stance against the war in Vietnam, but also the way he said, you can't talk about the war against you cannot talk about anything related to the civil rights or the American people or issues like poverty and unemployment in the United States without talking about what we as a country are also doing to Vietnam. And there's something really important for today that we want to not just lift up on Thursday, that April 4th, as a commemoration, but also to defend Martin Luther King Jr. And also to assert him as the father of a new nation. Okay, founding fathers, Jefferson, Frank, whatever, all those people, Franklin. No, man, you can't go back to 1776 anymore. The last great transformative moment in American history is the civil rights movement, the Black freedom struggle, and where it left off, where people let it die like, but we're not gonna let it die. We're gonna pick it up. And actually it's King who's the father of a new nation. And then April 6th is where we want to bring in Baldwin. Like James Baldwin, like in some ways, I kind of said this word, but I don't know if it's the right word, like James Baldwin as a messenger or an extension of King's vision for peace. Like, because actually when I was talking to Valerie Russ from the Inquirer, Valerie Russ from the Inquirer is writing a piece for the Inquirer on our literacy campaign, and then also she wants to publish the piece before the April 4th event because she wants to bring people. She wants people to come to the April 4th event, and she's also an interesting person because, like, she actually is trained in journalism. Like, I think journalism is one of those, similar to art or whatever. Journalism is one of those like really noble job professions that are super denobilized because like people lie. Like, you know, when we talk about the Wilfred Bichettes who actually were like to speak the truth, like, hey, yeah, actually America was the one who stoked the Korean War. Or actually like in Vietnam, like it was the American army, it was not North versus South Vietnam. It was it's really the Vietnamese people versus the Americans. Like Julian Assange, like there's not a lot of truth sayers who it's their profession. And Valerie Russ, like I was so, and like actually for my job, I have to talk to like reporters all the time and they're like super fake, but it's all about an agenda. Like, and I talked about it with Valerie, and Valerie was like, yes, journalism is filled with people nowadays who know what kind of article they want to write, and they're not actually talking to you because they want to know what you think. They're talking to you because they want you to endorse whatever article they're trying to write. But anyways, Valerie Russ, she was trained by this man named professor named Samuel Yeti, and he was a professor in journalism at Howard, and he wrote this book. She was basically saying that she was like the very first people who knew something was wrong with the Vietnam War were the journalists. And she was like, if you're a journalist, you took your job seriously back then, you knew that there's something fucked up with the Vietnam War that was full of lies. And she was basically posing the question, which is like, well, what about now? Why is it that journalists, rather than being the people who first know what's wrong, what lies are being told, they're the first people to defend the state? It was so interesting. And anyway, so she's gonna send. So that's why there are photographers being sent to Wooden Shoe and to Making Worlds. So like she wants to include photos of
for this article on the Year of Baldwin in the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Yeah, and she and I think she was actually really shocked at. Basically, she was like, I remember she was like, I can tell you have like strong convictions. And I think what she really was interested in, actually deep down could tell, was the relationship between Daw. Okay, because to an outsider, you're like, oh, this older Black gentleman and all these like young people who are like Asian and from different backgrounds. And basically people, I think, are stunned by the depth of your relationship to young people. That like, you're not even a professor anymore. You were kicked out of Temple. And yet, how is it that you still teach more young people than most professors do?
Right.
Like, you still have the respect of more students than any formal professor does.
Right.
And like, I think she was really stunned by that. And then it was funny because she was like, how is Tony? Because like, I know COVID really like took out a lot of older people. I was like, that man gave me COVID. I was like, he gave me COVID. Like, I was out for a week and he like didn't even think he had COVID. He was in denial. He was a COVID denier. But it was kind of funny. I was like, nah, he's reversed age. So like, she was excited, so she's gonna like talk to Doc for the interview. But anyways, how did I get into this again?
Because you're about to say something about the event and the second day.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the second day. It's about the extension of James Baldwin. So we're gonna have, and I think what we should do, something we're talking about still, is we want people to hear Baldwin's voice and how like, and hear that like he is an extent, like basically, oh yeah, this is something Valerie said. That's what I talked about. Valerie was like, she just got it. She was like, so what you're telling me is that if King's a revolutionary, Baldwin's a revolutionary. And what you're telling me is that King's vision for peace is like, what you're saying is that King is not the only revolutionary voice for peace, and that Baldwin has the exact same revolutionary voice for peace.
Yeah. Wow, she
said that. And I was like, wow. And she's like, no, I'm just a good journalist. I'm listening to what you're saying.
So you're saying,
and no, but she got it. And she was also talking about the crisis of churches because she has a son who's 27, which is my age. And he was like raised in the Philly school system. And she was just talking about the crisis of youth, the crisis of values. She was talking about also the crisis of churches. She was like, when I first moved to Philly, my mom told me, go find a church. And I tried to find a church, and I couldn't find a church because they were all obsessed with money. She was like, how is money going to save your soul? And it's just interesting because because it's King's speech against the war in Vietnam, where he also calls for a revolution of values. And it's the same task of today. That this is not just it's a foreign policy issue, but it's a question of the American people.
No, it is.
A revolution of values.
Yeah, it is Baldwin. To understand that speech, to understand King, you have to understand Baldwin's method of
Yes.
the biography of a people.
Right.
This is something we still have to work out. But the second day will be King and Baldwin. How we put it together is not quite clear yet, but this very idea that these two irreplaceable figures meet at the same moment on the stage of history and make history. So the second day will be that, and with our intercivilizational cultural events as well. But it will be a different kind of day. The first day will be more the fourth, where we will have the filming of the Why Oppose the War in Vietnam, and then a panel to discuss it in light of the current crisis, both geopolitically and domestically. And by the way, this is one of the points that we will have to navigate in the reading groups, and that is the question of this election. It came up when we met with the people from Zion, because among Black people, there's strong anti-Trump sentiments, for good reason, by the way. But that's not the whole picture. So we have to navigate that. But that panel the first day, will talk about and think about and so on this moment. And what would a time to break silence look like as the revolutionary moral imperative? However, the second day would be, we said one panel, right? And then more culture. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to say this thing about the culture that we had discussed this past meeting, because contextualizing the culture within the revolutionary and political.
That's right. Yeah, this is going to be
And how we would do that, we've done in smaller ways, and particularly of what I mentioned in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad event with Michelle introducing the jazz musicians. But the responsibility in that I also found that was important in regards to what we are talking about now, which is not only contextualizing King, but specifying, excavating the meaning of why they're important. Is the same thing as we've been almost attempting to do and now kind of getting at with the intercivilizational aspects. And I'm only saying that because I think our discussion is also representative of the importance of this being in our minds when we are gonna partake in introducing maybe a person like Brahmya or the Koreans or the Cambodians. I think when we're talking about a new world, a new language, like how Michelle, a new vocabulary, like Michelle, you had mentioned, the contradictions in America are the contradictions of the world. That'll also help in how we are situating the culture. So I just wanted to mention that because I wanted to be on our minds.
And we should finalize where we're going to have the events. We will probably have them at different venues. I don't know. We're thinking about Mother Bethel, certainly for the first day. They have a wonderful space. And I don't know, we were just kicking it around because the second day we would need a place that would accommodate cultural performance. So we're thinking about the Asian Arts Initiative, what is now called the Arts Initiative.
Oh, really?
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa,
Are you sure?
damn. I can see them doing that.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we are. And probably, hopefully by the end of the week, we'll be able to finalize everything. And as you're aware, we don't have all the time in the world. We have less than a month. I mean, and that, no problem. I mean, but we have to be disciplined and focused and so on. That's. We just open discussion.
Oh, yeah. So, any comments, discussion?
Well, honestly, okay, we're just reading Just Above My Head.
Who's the
In
Who's the
I was about to say it, but in the Wednesday reading group, which is like people from Cornell or what they wanted to call Van Dunk. And that was, and it's the second time reading Just Above My Head, but I also went ahead and I finished Just Above My Head. So the only thing I wanted to really say.
Just ahead of my.
Yeah, right. The only thing I really wanted to say is to reiterate Michelle's point about the new vocabulary and like how this this moment is prepared for a certain uncovering, and in the same way that our issues are relevant or necessary to deal with for the rest of the world also. Like after I finished the book, like I texted like so many people, and I had told Doc that, and this was, mind you, like after I finished it, I was weeping. So I know that when I'm reading it with everybody in Bandung, the slow reading that we're doing is something that like it's like I embrace it. You embrace the pain, you know what I mean? You're but the thing I want to get to, I'm sorry if I sound like I'm saying too much, but is that like when there's something that is confirmed in that endeavor that Baldwin did in making that book, and to continue on our path, like is also an endeavor that may be seen as an impossibility. And I just wanted to say that I think Baldwin almost knew, in a sense, about us accepting our roles in history. The necessity for us to do it, and I'm saying us because I think he was always thinking about us. And then maybe just the possibility that it was done, that it is supposed to be worked out, and that we have all the tools in our disposal. But it was really emotional for me because it is just a reminder, and you have to have these reminders or you'll kind of go like, you'll compare yourself to something that doesn't exist. And a reminder to myself, right? I'm gonna just talk for myself, that, what we're doing in free school is really or maybe the only possibility. Like it just made me reflect about free school, because not only do I appreciate really everybody in a sense that I'm here for the journey, I'm here for people, and I hope people are here for me too. But that it takes a certain quality, like Emily had mentioned this thing about nakedness, and this is something that I mentioned to Doc too, to be, in a sense, what could be seen as naive, but really is optimistic, or what could be seen as a dreamer, but is really a concrete, like something that is real. Like, I believe that this world can change. There are aspects of this world that should not happen, like those things. So I'm excited to get into the book. I was like texting Raju too. I was like, can you read this book for me? Because for me, because I also think that Baldwin was thinking about India too. Like, Baldwin was thinking about people who might not know really exactly where the future will take or lead, but that we must get there. I'm only saying it in generalities because nobody's also read it, so I can't wait for people also to go through it. Yeah, anyway.
Well, what's interesting about reading this in my head is it's so first all the Sandom people, we started with Go Tell It on the Mountain, and then now we fast forwarded to just a little ahead, so from the first level to the last level. And I was just thinking a certain thing was talking. Go Tell It on the Mountain ends with the beginning of it. And just above my head is one reflecting.
Right.
And
His first novel and his last novel.
yeah.
Yes.
Because those are also just above my head is I think it's the one novel where he actually gets into the movement. Like, the characters actually are part of the civil rights movement. And one of the interesting things that when I first read it, when I also didn't catch that much, but the thing that did stand out was he has a few of his characters fight in the Korean War, and then they come back, and then he talks about, or he captures the sense of it's almost the language that they use is I don't know if I'll ever get clean again. That's the language that I think it might be Hall or
It's Hall.
Yeah. Although they don't actually Baldwin actually doesn't go with them to the war, but it's on the return back, because I think also Baldwin was dealing with the aftermath of Vietnam too. But yeah, I think that's partially what. Yeah, I feel is also at the heart of this question, with the April event, why is peace a revolutionary? Because I think, especially with with the war in Gaza and stuff, I think on social media, I feel I've seen a lot of people resharing Simply Chronicle on and I think they'll often use quotes of how can I peace doesn't actually mean Kwame Ture saying peace doesn't mean freedom, you're telling me to be at peace with basically an unjust system and all that stuff. And I feel that was also I honestly I feel Sophie Carmichael was deliberately misinterpreting King at that point.
This is a very interesting question.
I mean, there's I know there's a lot of ideological struggle that was happening within the movement at the time, but I just feel it's partially it's because King is so clear when he talks about the difference between positive peace and negative peace. Where obviously when let's say Joe Biden is we want peace in Palestine, we want peace, obviously that is not what King would have meant by peace. And I think and most sane people would recognize that. But I think it's another step to actually think about why is peace still a revolutionary call rather than something that is more moderate or more restrained. And I think part of it that I feel we've been working on free school is it's not just peace as a thing contained within itself, but it's the call for peace and the American people's understanding of the need for peace, which is the prerequisite for a new kind of democratic conversation in this country, a new democratic kind of consciousness, where Baldwin also puts it to every American very plainly, where he's the bombs dropped in Vietnam, I guess that's also King, but like where he's like every bond village is my hometown, but that also the American he's like the American people are uniquely responsible for what their government does around the world. And the possibility for a new kind of democracy in the United States depends on the American people recognizing that they bear a very special responsibility for what this country does around the world. And that is the only way that new democracy can be achieved. And I feel like that is the element of it which I feel like is always removed when people talk about like peace versus like because I also don't think that like whether it's like King or like James Lawson, for instance, like they were never opposed to a revolutionary people struggle for freedom, whether it was in like Vietnam or Korea, all these places. And yeah, I mean, it's not the call for peace is also not to it's not a thing to critique even like the Palestinian people struggle for freedom in this time. But it's more about like can the American people come together and actually realize this is our responsibility, and the only way that like America can actually become like a new kind of nation and essentially no longer an empire is for a new kind of democracy to emerge. And I feel like that's like I was just thinking about the peace question because
just on that point you raised about Stokely Carmichael and King, it's a question in my mind that Stokely intentionally distorted King in order to advance his own political standing. And I don't say this as an enemy of Stokely Carmichael, but as a friend. But it's no question about it. And everything in his life after the assassination of King, I won't say everything, but of course, that the center of the Black struggle would be in Africa, yada, 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 a whole number of other things. But you are absolutely right, but he is not alone in that. And especially, and this is why the April 4th event is going to be very important, to sever the nexus between the struggle against imperialist wars, which is the struggle for peace in an imperialist nation. And we can never forget, this is an imperialist nation, the center of a global empire that has 800 military bases. It places upon the American people a higher responsibility. And this is where the moral and revolutionary issues are joined. It is a moral, revolutionary. The revolutionary question is not separate from the moral imperative, the moral question. So, and I guess that's part of what we're going to have to define as we go forward, revolutionary epistemology, but what the peace struggle. And after King's great speech, and then he was assassinated, but the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Coretta Scott King, Diane Nash, Abernathy, they did not abandon civil rights and economic justice, but they joined it to the world movement for peace. This is highly important, especially with this threat of nuclear war over our heads, over the heads of the people. And we do, and this is what Gannon was saying last week. And of course, the Korean Peninsula.
I just wanted to respond to what you said, Jeremiah, about like Goats Out on the Mountain being written by Baldwin beginning like on a journey, and then just some of my head being at the end, like referring to the end being like a reflection, but referring to the epistemological conversation that we had about Baldwin, because what's been running in my head is the easily put philosophical framework but harder put the man, and thus like the quality of the American essence that has to play itself out.
You
And
say American essence.
yeah,
That's interesting. I want to get it straight.
only
No, I'm
because,
sorry, I didn't
only
mean to-
because,
No.
well, the thing is
The
that
American essence.
the thing is that I'm still reeling from the conversation that we had at the library and working out the different qualities or the different definitions. Basically working out what is the American framework, and Baldwin getting or being as though he can like I'm thinking about how when he's older, there's a reflective quality, or there's a way to come to who he and is, also gives to a sense of what is the goal, simply put, for the future or whatever. But then, because in Goats Out on the Mountain, John, or the main, kind of protagonist, begins at the end of his book. Like his beginning also becomes at the end of his book. And so how is it that Baldwin had to come to a certain agreement or come to understand himself, which is basically also him reflecting on his life thus far to be able to move forward. And the same or a similar process had to also happen with Just Above My Head, and thinking through what one has been through to be able to move forward. And I just kind of wanted to kind of expand on the autobiographical versus like the historical, because I'm trying to make sense of where my brain is, how I'm affected, how I'm thinking about my commitments, my life, my, and because, this is also what gets me back to free school, because I know that I speak in a certain way. And like Michelle had mentioned that I like bend words a lot, because in my head, I'm like, well, do I really know what the word, for example, like indispensable, or for example, do I really know what, like it will be in any, so I don't mean to kind of talk like I don't know what I'm saying, but in a sense, I'm trying to really get at what I'm saying.
Yeah, right.
So I'm thinking about, well, what is the quality that I'm trying to bring out?
Right.
And maybe it is a criticism on the English language. Like for instance, like Baldwin, English is a dishonest, that whole, or that it has something to do with unresolved problems that this country also faces, which is, well, something also in love that we don't understand, or something that, because the thing that I was mentioning that I was talking too much about, I'm sorry, in the beginning, we did have a lot to go through, is that notion of the terror, the loneliness, the height and depth of love, right? So like terror, the quality of terror, you watch horror movies and you're like, why is it that we're afraid of nothing, or that we can be afraid of things that don't exist? Like there's literally movies about being afraid of fear. But then with loneliness, like, okay, well, loneliness, you can understand it as one being alone. But maybe the quality of loneliness is also now different. Maybe loneliness has to do with the individual or the singular, one inside a group, inside a historical moment, and one without. The person that is, like the mind, but then height also becomes a different quality. It's not just a mathematical word. Height has to do with like space. Like height has to do with like time, or something that's already working itself out. And the same height and depth, like the feeling, the emotion, the soul. That's where things like so I'm like, I think I'm just in my head working out or trying to get to a certain conclusions about these things to apply it, because I'm always applying things.
Oh, yeah.
But I just wanted to kind of go back and forth about that.
That's why when you said the essence of the American people, I was very interested in that. You don't have to define it now, but I think, in a lot of ways, in this whole thing, we are searching for essence. We can call it foundations, we can call it anchorage. But it's a very important thing. And your concept of the quality of things, not just the quantity of things. And the way you talked about these spatial geographic terms like height and depth, as opposed to terror and loneliness, and Baldwin, and we don't have to answer any of this now, Baldwin connecting all of those in this short paragraph where he's talking about his brother's love for him. And he realized that when his brother was teaching him to swim and he took him underwater, that Baldwin realized these four qualities of love.
Right.
And they're not easily, they're not easily defined. And this is the thing, I know I don't talk a lot, but we were not struggling, but, trying to get right the things for which you need a new vocabulary. And so, yes, we are, struggling with language. It's just like Samir said, the concrete form of thought. But
yeah, I also wanted to, I was also thinking of this question of Baldwin and epistemology, and also responding to what you were also saying, because it seems that when Baldwin talks about the nature of the English language, especially when he talks about Shakespeare and so on, and how he initially talks about, like in the early 60s, he talks about his grievances with Shakespeare, and then later on he reconciled his relationship with Shakespeare to some extent. But it seems that what he's saying is, I can't remember where, but he talks about how the fact that he does not believe in words such as nobility or integration or peace. But then he says, but at the same time, there are some people are noble, and there is such a thing as integrity. And I think
there's such a thing as well.
There is such a thing as integrity. Even though he does not believe, even though he sees that there is there is an inherent dishonesty in the way that these words are often used. At the same time, I think he sees and is trying to show us that that there is such a thing as striving and aspiration. And he says this really chilling thing. He says that the reality behind these words actually depends on what we do.
Yes.
And it's not about what the word is supposed to mean, but on our actions.
Yes.
And when you were talking about epistemology, I was thinking of how the question is about the question of how we know the theory of knowledge and so on, but it's usually in today's usual conversation there is a distinction, at least in the academy, that's made between epistemology and purpose of knowledge. And it seems that what he's doing is really trying to bridge that gap, because the purpose of language, for instance, is to instruct us how to live a moral life and how all of that. And he's saying that the way to know the world, the way to know language, is to see this inherent gap between like in between who you are and who you think you should be. That's like, that's sort of what you see that the purpose, like the purpose of the writer, the purpose of the artist is to, that's why he says it's only the poet who knows us. It's not the statesman, it's not the politician, but it's the poet. And I think he's saying this because, like when you were talking about epistemology, that's what it was making me think of. That he's trying to bridge the gap between the purpose of knowledge, the purpose of art, of language, with the theory of how we know, how we produce art, how we think, all of this. And something, I can't remember what it was, but something certain I was saying, it reminded me of the time, why we are having this conversation about epistemology today, and Baldwin's epistemology today is to get to the essence of the revolutionary thought that's needed for today and that lives in the people today, and we're trying to we're almost trying to articulate that. And I think at every time the revolutionary task has been to sort of free a revolutionary thought from revolutionaries, because when we read some of us have been reading because we have another reading group, and also because we're trying to write an article about science. We're also reading Lenin's materialism and empirical criticism, and the main thing the main point that I got from it that we have been getting from it is how in his time, in the first decade of the 1900s, the revolutionary task was to was to get to the essence of Marxist thought away from the so-called Marxists of his time, who were at the time when they were trying to defend Marx and all of that. They were ultimately going back to the positivist framework, and he had to recover that. And but I bring up Lenin because it seems that there is a similarity between what he was trying to do. He was also trying to bridge the gap between epistemology and the purpose of knowledge, which would come for 10 years later. And it seems, I don't think they're the same thing, but I think there's a similarity between what Baldwin, or the options that Baldwin presents to us today, and what the early 1900s was, what we saw in the early 1900s. And I'm thinking that this question of epistemology is so important now because this is the gap to be bridged, between the purpose of art and how we do art. What does an artist mean today? And but I mean, I also wanted to ask what
Ask what? Can I add to that? But it's also, I also wanted to speak about epistemology because I'm still stuck on the very beginning of this conversation about the autobiographical, and how we were talking about Baldwin as, an autobiography of Baldwin in some ways, in every possible way being also an autobiography of America. But the first thing this reminded me was also of what Du Bois did in his autobiography, The Dusk of Dawn, where he named it the autobiography of a race concept.
Yes.
It's
called Dusk of Dawn.
Dusk of Dawn.
The autobiography of a race concept.
Of a race concept.
And if I could just say, have to touch somebody. I mean, so maybe because see, that's where it came to my mind that autobiography is a word that can have many meanings, and the methodology, the concept of an autobiography of a concept. This is why I was relating. This is why I was relating so much to you, Sambarta, where you talked about the ideological task at the beginning of the 20th century and the ideological task of this century. And you can't, like you're saying, there are new problems, there are new vocabularies, there are new meanings. So this idea of the autobiography of a people, of a nation, and as Baldwin said, that does not yet exist. See, this is what I mean. This is opening up possibilities of thinking, and I agree completely that most quote radical thought is stuck. It's like they're too late. First of all, they're not talking about the American people, because to do that means the Du Bois, but let me stop here.
No, but the way I was thinking about it also is that it's I think this is unique to the Black tradition, but again, I'm only starting to think about this now, but what it makes me realize is it's a very different way to even see the human being, where you don't see the human being as, okay, just an individual, just every one of us, as like unique manifestations of what, but every human being as also, the story or the autobiographical tale of what can be produced by a civilization. Like, what can America produce? What can India produce? What can produce somebody like us who are Indians, but now are part of, in some ways, the American revolutionary process. And honestly, if you were to really take this seriously, to start thinking of ourselves as not just ourselves, but also a manifestation of what can be produced, I think this is what I mean. It is a path to the forging of a new kind of people. And I find this in Du Bois and I find this in Baldwin. And I feel, and this is something that I'm going to propose, but I want to know what people think. I think the reason they were so focused, why the human being was so central to them, I think it comes from the condition of being oppressed or historically being oppressed, where your humanity is not something you can take for granted because it's something that has been.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think this is why I'm so taken, the ways that Sarah's going to use essence. I think the autobiography of Black folk as a people is the search for their essence. It's what Du Bois called the souls of Black folk. But it is that search in the course. See, the quality of Black resistance is manifested in its art, in its writers, in its thinkers. And it's a high quality of resistance. And it becomes the framework for resistance of the American people, period. It is not these notions of the quote class struggle without the people.
Right.
So
I don't have very much else to add to
I
what.
didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, really, that's all I was thinking about. But I also think that this is just something, if internalized, could provide a lot of clarity.
There's no question.
The idea that we are not just individuals. We are individuals. We make individual choices, moral choices, but we are also the sum of a process, of a historical and civilizational process. It's really unique.
I wanted to.
I feel like I'm in John Coltrane's classic time to take it a solo.
Well, on this point that we're talking about, that also Shambartu, you had articulated as like epistemology unlocking this like continuum between who you really are, reality, and who you see yourself to be, or who you are striving toward. Like, I wanted to read this last paragraph in the creative process, because I think Baldwin talks exactly about this. He says, "We know in the case of the person that whoever cannot tell himself the truth about his past is trapped in it, is immobilized in the prison of his undiscovered self. This is also true of nations. We know how a person in such a paralysis is unable to assess either his weaknesses or his strengths, and how frequently, indeed, he mistakes the one for the other. And this, I think, we do. We are the strongest nation in the Western world, but this is not for the reasons that we think. It is because we have an opportunity that no other nation has in moving beyond the old world concepts of race and class and caste. to create finally what we must have had in mind when we first began speaking of the new world. But the price of this is a long look backward when we came and an unflinching assessment of the record. And then this is the line that I really wanted to read. For an artist, the record of that journey is most clearly revealed in the personalities of the people the journey produced. Societies never know it, but the war of an artist with this society is a lover's war. And he does, at his best, what lovers do, which is to reveal the beloved to himself. And with that revelation, to make freedom real. I always loved this entire passage because it is about the American essence, and the word unique always came to my mind as well. Like uniquely, the unique, the uniqueness, like a uniquely American contradiction, a uniquely American resolution process. But this line in particular, like always really struck me. That for an artist, the record of that journey is most clearly revealed in the personalities of the people that journey produced. Like I always wondered exactly what he was saying because it said something to me about the way that I found myself in America, this strange land, and I discovered myself to be an American. And in a way, I think I had to look at the people like that appeared in my life to make that real or to make that articulate. And then it became clarified, once these personalities were also revealed to me through history. But there's something about what you were saying, Purba, that really that's that idea that I'm still working out. The person, like the American person, the king of Baldwin, but then also that we can't quite go back once that personality has appeared on the stage. Yes.
We can't quite go back.
We can't go back once such a personality has arrived on the stage of history.
Okay, and by you talking about the Baldwin.
Yeah, let's say the Baldwin, but we have so many of them, and I think what I also wanted to say is we're going to see a lot of it in 2024 in Philadelphia, which is becoming, how do you say it, it's becoming
pressure cooker.
No, like an orb, like an orb that you can peer into the American future through that somehow contains all of the crisis and all of the despair, but also all of the hope and the possibility.
Yeah, the wheel within the wheel.
Yeah. Okay, not the orb, the orb within the
But
orb.
I think when you said orb, it reminded me of the wheel within the wheel.
Yeah, no, because even from, well, I didn't get to say this earlier, but for the first 2 hours when we were just talking about the different sites, the different personalities again, for example, Valerie Russ, I wanted to ask you about that later because I first met Valerie when I was a Penn student and she came to cover the relationship between students and the Black dining workers. I know her in a different way, but now she's arriving on the scene again with a new eye, a new language, a new depth. And that's just one, right? Then there's Mother Bethel, which is where I first met Tony in 2019. And I felt in awe just listening to how all of this is coalescing in a new way.
Right.
And I'm saying, shit, it's different. It's different. Something is different now. And these are new, it's a new relationship.
What is
It's a new,
what is the difference?
well, it's something qualitative.
And what is that?
Is this a quiz?
Yes. I mean, I ask because I want to know.
Yeah, no. Give me a second to formulate it, but it's what we were talking about earlier in the conversation where you put it as a common striving. I might use the word an urgency, but also an arrival by which all of these sectors can somehow link together and be united in a practice, be united actually in a political process. And that has to do with all types of forces, but I'm seeing that shift, and I'm saying shit because this city, but this country will not be the same after this year, and it is already not the same as it was a year ago.
I kind of think the difference, because I was listening to everyone and I was like, whoa, I felt like my brain was exploding and then I got stressed out that I was gonna die. Because I think it's all the same in some ways. It's we're all the way I'm piecing it together is I also like the word essence because I was really struck by something Jeremiah had said where, I forget how you phrase it, but you started with what makes the call for peace revolutionary.
Right.
But then there's also the question of there's the general question of what is revolutionary, but then there's also the question of the American essence. Like you said, I was really actually struck by something you said where it was the American people have a unique responsibility to its government than no other people necessarily have. And I think it's true because what you said too, which is America's contradiction is the world's contradiction.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, let's just take a country let's just even take a country like India. Even if Indians go on their way to resolve their own people achieving their own nation, it's still interlocked with America. And Americans, there's something about, and I actually feel like there's something about the American essence is intertwined with revolution. You know what I mean? In the American essence is, I think, inherently intertwined with revolution in a way that I'm not sure other people's in this modern world is the same. It's a different in some ways I think there's a slightly different task because of chronology, the revolutionary chronology in America. And the difference that I would identify is because when I was thinking about Baldwin has this in Meeting the Man, Baldwin said this thing where he's like, the interviewer was like, would you say you're revolutionary? And he's like, I would not say I'm a revolutionary. I would say that I'm a writer, I'm an artist in a revolutionary situation. Right. And I found that distinction interesting because I'm like, but why do I feel so comfortable being like, oh, I'm a revolutionary, or I want to be a revolutionary? But he was making the point that there's something actually really important that he's distinguishing that I'm living in a revolutionary situation, which is also to say that, first of all, he recognizes the civil rights movement, the Black freedom struggle, what the American people are all going through. Because, here's also another thing people say. The civil rights movement, people think is a Black issue or a civil rights issue. But actually, what Baldwin is saying is it's revolutionary because whether the rest of American society, aka white Americans or whoever, does not think that they are actually involved in civil rights, they are.
Yeah.
The point is that actually what you think is really a Black issue in the South, a civil rights issue in the South, is actually a vortex consuming all American people, whether you want to face it or not. And so it's revolutionary. But then I also think...
You said whether you want to face it or not, so it's revolutionary. But how do you get whether you want to face it or not,
you're already sucked into the vortex. The civil rights issue is a reflection of an American. That's what makes it a revolutionary situation. But I actually think...
Say that again. I'm not that I'm trying to... It's not. I'm just trying to get it clear. Could you said I'm still because we have to kind of solve this problem.
Yeah.
What is an American revolution?
Right. Well, let me.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Well, I'll go forward to go backwards, but because I think the difference today is because I was looking at a poll I was telling you earlier, or that there was a poll that said that actually, interestingly, and I don't believe in the labels of Republican or Democrat anymore, because a registered Republican is not what you think is a Republican, and a registered Democrat is not what you think is a Democrat. A so-called Democrat is honestly probably upper class, Hillary Clintonite. It's just not. It's more defining to call it a registered Democrat is not necessarily who you think is not the multiracial Democratic Party of the Kennedy era, blah blah blah. A registered Republican is also not the Mitch McConnell supporters necessarily. There's too many divisions for Republican or Democrat to be defining. But the poll said that actually, according to the poll, just speaking, that over 50% of Americans think that America should not do more for the rest of the world. And then actually, and if you refine it even more, if something 56% of registered Republicans said that they think America should remove foreign aid from the rest of the world, that they should do less for the rest of the world. And when asked why, they referenced that they don't think America had good outcomes in Vietnam or Korea or Afghanistan. And what I'm pointing out is the contradictions and because something Baldwin and King both say in their speeches in 1968, when I was looking at it this morning, is like Baldwin phrases it in an interesting way. In some ways, Baldwin can say more than King can say because King serves a certain role.
Yes.
So despite how many internal frustrations King may have, he can never say it outright because he has a certain role to play. Whereas Baldwin can say it because Baldwin's role is to like say it. And like, so Baldwin says both basically like, he basically says that the only reason why America has any hope is because there is King. And he says King is the only reason, King has redeemed what we as a nation claim to live by.
Right.
And what he's pointing to is, if you think about it, most people, the thing that people have to be able to do is realize that things are more complex than you think.
Yes.
Like love, that's what Sarah keeps saying. Love is not happy, like happy, I have family, like I have dinner when I come home, happy, like I get to like have a vacation and like Turks and Caicos with my boyfriend, and then in the summertime we're gonna go to Bali and like blah blah blah. Like it's not, love doesn't feel good. Actually, the point is that it's complex. Love feels bad oftentimes, and love is painful, and love hurts. And once you realize that love hurts, you're not so scared. You don't have as much fear to love. Like, so it's complex. And the point is that like Baldwin is saying,
Can I ask you, if you don't mind me, because on that very question of love, see, for me, often for Baldwin, the question is not just love, but the object of the love, that which you love, and not just the person. Because I think ultimately what he talks about, he loves this nation, and he loves it so much that he will tell the truth. And so he, even in this quote, I think because he's talking about an experience with his older brother that taught him something about love, including that love can bring you, that which you love can bring you close to death.
Yes.
And I don't think, I know this, we can talk about, I think he's talking about this elevated sense. That is not the liberal romantic ideal. It is the ideal of a revolutionary love.
Right.
And the revolutionary is always prepared to put his life on the line for that which he loves, in the way that King put his life on the line knowingly. He knew he was targeted for death, but he wouldn't retreat.
And like the point I wanted to make was the connection between like what Shambarta was saying about the individual, not just being an individual, but even being a reflection of the nation. That there's a complex gap. Can your mind handle the complexity that there is such thing as not just yourself, but who you want to be and who you actually are, and that there's a gap. And only until you can accept the complexity of that can you close the gap. And that's for an individual or for a nation. And so that's the point of like, in some ways, I don't know if this is the definition of revolutionary, but what also made Baldwin say, I'm in a revolutionary situation is that for the first time, people were pointing out that this nation, there's a difference between what we claim to be and what we actually could be. And then that's what you were, I think, referencing too. Yes. And
it's his way of saying, I'm not going to say I'm a revolutionary, because he says, let my deeds, let my writing be the proof of whether I am or am
not. Yeah. And like, and that's why I brought up the poll today, because I actually think, because people, for example, I don't know if people in, let's say, 1958 or whatever, understood that time as a revolution. And even today, like, because what I'm also saying is that when we read Baldwin, the way that we may not be king, Baldwin was not king, but we can be like, in some ways we pick up where someone like Baldwin is left. Like we pick up something that Baldwin like lived his life to become. And like being able to say, like, for example, look at that poll and be like, hey, things are not as simple as Republican or Democrat, but actually there's also things are not as simple as that basically, how can you hear a quote unquote registered Republican, let's just say they're a Trump supporter, I don't know, someone, an ordinary person, just a normalized person, pointing out that there is such thing as hypocrisy. Like that is a reflection of a
There
revolutionary
is such a
situation.
thing as hypocrisy.
That there is such thing as hypocrisy.
Mhm.
And in some ways, this goes back to the point about what is so special about an American or the American people is that actually and this is the problem, is that if you are born in this country, and actually, I think it's a fact, if you are born in this country, you are already given, in some ways, you're already given a responsibility that you don't even realize. And it's a responsibility of even recognizing the difference between what people say this country is or who you are versus what you must become and what this country must become. There's a gap. And those people who choose not to want to recognize the gap have succumbed to what some people would call a white society, American society, Western arrogance, immaturity. And because I think there is something about basically saying what makes an American special, no matter your race, what are you born, what kind of responsibility in some ways are you born into, an autobiography that's handed to you. And the question is whether you'll write in it or not, you'll add to it.
Exactly. Because I think we're obsessed now, meaning, it's almost that quality that Lotus was talking about with the students. And the conversation that we had about the difference between us in 2017, also becoming 18 or whatever, versus today in 2024 becoming 18 on the podcast. Because I think we're obsessed with wanting to apply what we know, or wanting to become exactly what we believe we can be. And what you said of in spite of, it's so funny because there's so many scenarios that happen to you when you are coming up in America. Family oriented, neighborhood oriented, whether that be the drug problem that white people are going through in most cities and counties, or the deindustrialization and how that affected all of us, or violence, which is the nature of either drug use, meaning there's a lot of situations that happen to an individual that make it almost impossible to acknowledge really what one's purpose is. But it's almost because of those situations that give you a sense of purpose. At least, meaning for me, I know that my personal crisis, it was pointing me or getting me somewhere. And I had to go down a certain path to get here, because I know that my life was supposed to be this. My life was supposed to use all of my tools that I have. And that's my personal tool, whether that be intellect, talent, but the thing is what I'm excited about really with what you're saying, Emily, is the fact that we can apply. And I don't, and like you said, in a different time, know that was so generalized. Generalized meaning that almost everybody knew that there's something to be applied for this moment that they're living in. There's something that's fucked up and that should be probably either spoken about or changed. And if you don't speak about it, then what happens to you is that you are on the sideline of history and you put yourself there.
And that's a moral choice.
It is a moral choice. And many people also do that. But the only reason why I kind of felt like that, honestly, is because, the other thing I wanted to say was this thing about the artist, the problem of the artist. You guys are all looking at me when you're saying this because I feel you. But I also know that it's so funny that I am one in a sense. Because what, American or maybe because of America, artists are supposed to give you what you like. We're supposed to make you feel like what your desires are important. You shouldn't care about really anything like integrity or really your civilization, which means your autobiography. That's what we're saying.
Yes.
And that goes with everything, right? But so what happened is that what happens is that artists also justify becoming something that doesn't really make sense in a sense. Like, I feel like if someone had asked me if I was a revolutionary, what would I say? And only because I'm so like conscious, meaning like I'm aware and come here really every week, that there's a certain level of plain language that I have to talk about that problem. And I feel like throughout the time that I've been in free school, I feel like whether that being writing in OPP about artists and the revolutionary with Paul Robeson, or I'm coming, like it comes around to this question again about the artist, like what are we the revolutionaries, meaning like within that same vein of Lenin, or what happened to what we understand of what Lenin did, which is we go by a certain dogma, we live in a certain way, and blah, yada, yada, yada. What also is considered is a certain context, like you said, Emily, like that creates artists, you know, a certain happenstance, and I think that's irregardless of really time or place, you know, in a certain sense, because even if there are specific rules, I think we're also supposed to ask what their use is, and you know, I think that's what artists have a tendency to do. Anyway, so because of this crisis that we're in, the problem is that we've justified, or we've become accustomed to feeling like we shouldn't be what we are, which is seeking out the truth and journeying really with everybody else. But what you had said specifically, Michelle, about the context that artists come up in, reflect the people that they are about, is also to say that, because on the one hand, I do know that really everybody is capable of being artists, meaning that there's a certain quality in all of us that seek out the truth. But I also know that for being an artist and really having to deal with that fact, you think about really everyone else all the time. Like there's never really you. Like there's not really just me, but in the same sense that is, you know, meaning you cannot talk about ideas without talking about where they came from. But I think it's made, like this crisis has made it possible where you can talk about ideas and not talk about where they come from. You know, like we talk, and then everything becomes very like narrow. Like, oh, I'm only an artist in this way. But I just had wanted to mention that the that there has been, or there also needs to be a realignment. Anyway.
So if, you know, when you talk about word apply or application, when you say that, it carries a lot of weight for me. The process of application, I see it as maybe that bridging the gap between the production of knowledge and the purpose of knowledge, or between what Michelle and Emily are talking about, the gap between the myth and reality, or the myth and what we want to become. And then when you say right now we're at a stage where we're obsessed with application, it means that there's been a shift in the production of knowledge, or a new relationship between the production of how we come to know what we know, and how we understand the purpose of that knowledge. That for me is like that application, that the word apply is the coming together, the bridging the gap.
Bridging the gap between what and what?
Between what Simbarta was talking about, the epistemology and the purpose of knowledge, that our understanding of knowledge has changed. There's been a point of no return. There's a point of no going back. And now that that's where that sense of urgency comes from. We can see the relationship between what we know and the purpose of it, the myth and the reality that we're striving for it.
That's interesting.
This makes me reflect a little bit more on the kind of freedom that I'm getting a better sense of in reading Baldwin and connecting that mosque, because to me reading Baldwin is like it's very liberating as an individual, and of course I haven't suffered and given my life like the people that I've gotten to know at the mosque who, for example, have spent time in a penitentiary, and like that, the kind of freedom that I think Baldwin seeks to give, and the kind of freedom that I think that mosque seeks to give, is this freedom that you can have even if you live in a like oppressed society. You don't want this society to be able to take away this sense of freedom and this striving for freedom that people deserve and need to be able to transform society. And of course, it's nothing of the sort of freedom from certain problems to remove yourself from certain problems. It's much more. It's that agency. Another lack of better words, I guess is I'm still looking for the language, but it's power. But it's not like something bad, but it's like the ability to affect positive change. And so that freedom of the individual to do that in their life, and then that life that you live can be an example to and a model or a pathway for someone else to follow. That really concrete thing that you might see somebody that I think I'm still getting a bit sensitive, but I'm inspired by people that I meet at mosques, and so that personal freedom that you get, that it becomes the freedom for society. Your life becomes greater than your own, and that journey that Baldwin has gone through to be a free human being in society, I think that is like the prime example. That and especially like the freedom to love.
Yeah.
In this society, I feel like that's something that is being is made almost impossible. And you have to kind of protect yourself from the forces of this society, both like your physical self. I mean, you feel you get shot, and then but your heart as well from being hurt. And well, I can only imagine what it was in his era where the forces of white society were made it so that a black person would hate themselves. So this freedom to like love yourself and to love others, I'm getting a greater appreciation and understanding from our conversation and my time at mosque.
What you said.
One talking about part of what makes America unique is it's like the dual thing of the responsibility that we have, but also the unique experience that we come out of. And I feel like that's part of what Baldwin speaks to, where he's like, yeah, Black people come out of an experience in this country that's never been actually written down. And has only been passed down from father to son to mother to daughter.
Yeah.
And but part of what Baldwin did was write things down. And I think this is what is sometimes maybe a little bit perplexing, I feel like, for let's say like an immigrant my father's immigrant, because it's like, it feels like you've been dropped into like this really long, like experience. And then you're just like kind of plopped into it and you're like, oh, like what am I supposed to make of all this? And I think it's like any young person. But I think that, I feel like that's also what is, what Baldwin also means by like a new language, where like he has, I think it's in the Double Fine Word, but he has this passage where he talks about subtext, where he's talking about Sidney Poitier's performance in The Divided Ones. And he's like, there's a moment, there's like a scene where like Sidney Poitier's wife is like, be nice, be nice. And then Baldwin's like, to black people watching that scene, they know what that means.
Right.
And it's this, that that's the subtext of basically like 200 years of experience. Right? But then he's like, Baldwin's like, I don't know like how white people relate to this, but I do know that they hold this anguish far outside of them. So like the task is like to bring that, as you guys are saying, to bring it together. It has to be a kind of collision where it's like white people are product of that history too. And the question is like, can you resituate yourself as you guys are saying, this a new sense of like what the individual is, but can you situate yourself in relationship to that experience because of your history too, because it produced you too. And I think the fascinating thing that like we're discovering in preschool, it's like even like for those of us whose parents came to this country in like the 80s or 90s or 70s, whatever, somehow we're also products of that experience. Like we discovered reading Baldwin, like, oh, like my family didn't go through this, but like somehow what he's saying speaks to like something that I've never been able to fully articulate growing up in American society. And I think that's part of the question of like a new language, like a new vocabulary, also like epistemology. Like can you bring what is kind of latent in a people's experience and bring it out into the open and make that then the actual common framework that comes to something that people relate.
Well, something that actually I felt during our first reading group at the Central Branch of the Free Library that I feel more like comfortable sharing is I actually think if you go back to the civil rights movement, that was the first time people were facing the past, like white and black people were facing the past. But I think that actually what I felt in the room when we were reading Baldwin was that all people, whether you're white and black or like everything in between, that all of us it was the first time that we were facing King's assassination together. I actually felt like it was the first time that I don't think anyone actually, I think in some ways that there was a new history that we had not faced, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And actually in that we would have to face it, make sense of King's life or whatever he represents, and then also his death and whatever we think that represents or what we'll let it represent. And we had to make sense of it to like together face each other in it to do it today. Because actually what I felt was, and I don't think anyone should feel bad about it or be blamed for it, but I think what I could sense is that after King's assassination, I actually think what I felt was that some of the black people in the room felt defensive of their history. Defensive of their history. Yeah. And I think white people were still like confused about what was actually being said. Like it was very clear that there was a lot that had to be done to
when you say defensive, you mean to defend their history.
Well,
or defensive.
Defensive.
Okay.
Like defense because I think, which makes sense. What I'm saying is, they feel hurt. Where I think, like,
the
because
wound is still there. Yes.
Well, because the thing that I think is really, I think what's painful and what makes you feel hurt and defensive is basically that what King was doing, what King and Baldwin were doing, where they were bridging a gap that had never been bridged before, which should be like what has been ours for 300 years. We're gonna make it public to let white people or other people be like what you were saying, that actually what we have known has been Black this whole time is actually yours too.
Yep.
And I think the thing that part of the healing process of King's assassination, because the feeling of betrayal that you guys let him die, is like coming back to terms.
And you know, in the sense that it didn't mean anything to y'all.
Yes, exactly.
That this great wound don't mean that much to
Yes,
y'all.
exactly.
Y'all gonna play us like you really
That you cared, right? So I think there's something about now that has to deal with like almost a certain period of history that is, like we said, a defining part of our autobiography as a people. It's almost, and I think it's almost like, because we were talking about this, the reference point is no longer slavery. Like that's where the origin, but that's not the defining reference point. The defining reference point is what happened to King. And in some ways, wow, what happened to King was, what does it say about us, and will we let it say what it says about us, or will we like take his life and make ourselves like worthy, like, you know? And yeah, and in some ways I think it's the first time that I'm seeing it that way.
Well, 'cause I think part of what King especially did, I think, was to make clear the gap and then also the journey that would need to be taken, where especially like with the Beyond Vietnam speech, like we return to it constantly now to say actually like King was able to project like basically what America would need to be like even 50 like years into the future. And I feel like part of it is that it doesn't matter whether you're Black or white or like whatever you came to this country, because it was about the future, like no matter where you're in, it matters to you. And I don't know, I just think like the autobiography concept is also really deep, because it's not the autobiography of like a race or like two races. It's the autobiography of a people, like a single people. And I feel like that's also why like what happened to King is perfect, because it's like, do you not recognize that he died for you? Like he didn't die for like part of society, like he actually died for you. And until everybody can recognize that, there can't be basically the fulfillment of this autobiography. And it's also that I think it's really like, to get a little bit more specific about this autobiography idea too, I feel like what I'm seeing is that it is about America, but also Philadelphia in particular. Like we're trying to get to like a certain level of concreteness or detail. Like where basically like through reading Baldwin together, like in the reading groups, everybody finds themselves individually, but also basically their place in Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia, like American society, and the world. And I think also part of it is because I started thinking a little bit about the exhibit that might happen in August, and how like will happen in August, but that we're trying to basically, we're not just talking about Baldwin the man, the individual, like the singular autobiography, but that it's Baldwin, like why he speaks to the city of Philadelphia and its people, but also why Philadelphia and its people reflect him, like they reflect him back. And I think that's why we want to like, it's not like the exhibit will not just be like, oh, like here are like the facts about Baldwin's life, but actually sort of drawing the parallels where the story of Baldwin's life is the story of like Black Philadelphia, or Philadelphia as a city. And we want to like basically lift up the Black worker, like the history with the archives and the art. And then to like, basically what we want to do too, I think, is to bridge the gap where there's the history of what happened in Philadelphia, like the Great Migration, the 20th century history. But to say that like, it's not just that, oh, this happened in the past and this is cool, like Baldwin was born 100 years ago. But to say like, actually what we want to do now is to bring it to the future. Like to say that from this, we can actually like make the autobiography, like it's not just Baldwin's life, but that the autobiography is like my
Yes.
It's basically like, that's my story and I'm going to live it now.
Well, because the way that we've been, I wanted to go back to this idea of Baldwin and that word extension, like an extension of King, because I think the pain, but also the contribution of Baldwin was also that he was forced to outlive King, and that really meant something.
Yes.
And that evolution and this emergence of a very modern language, these very modern concepts, like that all, I think, yeah, this conversation made me realize like that snapping point, that breaking point was King's assassination. But the thing I was also thinking about through this conversation is that I was born only 10 years after Baldwin passed. And that's true for a lot of us, is that the gap is actually so narrow. Like the torch is right there. And I was just thinking about that. Like, can you imagine 1987, and then just 3 years later, it was the 1990s, which like many of us were born in. Yeah.
Well, it's also like, they remind me of the concept, or like the phrase that Baldwin uses often of paying your dues.
Yeah. Paying your dues.
Yeah, where it's like
The price of the ticket.
where part of how he frames, especially the young students in the civil rights movement, is that they were paying their dues to basically like generations of their fathers and forefathers, like their grandmothers who had fought so hard to bring them to that point. And the thing that we're realizing is like actually we have dues to pay as well.
Yeah.
And it's not just a question of our history, but it's like it fundamentally means something for our future. But yeah, I think that has been like, I don't know, it's like like this is part of what I feel like is like the process that one way or another all Americans are gonna have to go to. It's like like Emily was saying, I think I too. But you have to like, or Mary was saying, sorry. But yeah, I was just thinking about that concept of like paying your dues.
Yeah.
Because I think that's actually like interestingly, even in a personal sense, because so many of us feel at this point like, oh like I don't know if I would be here alive if it weren't for someone like Baldwin King. And like out of a basic sense of like obligation almost, you're like, oh, I have to like honor that. And I have to do something with it. And and I feel like that's part of what it's like, the moral imperative that a lot of us operate under. It's like, we have to pay our dues to that generation because they fought us. And they also saved us in a lot of ways.
Well, no, just quickly, it's that thing of if they died for us, then we have no choice but to live and love.
I hope this isn't too much, but the way I've been thinking about it, as we've been discussing, is even to the point of the same body. That if it's a wound on me, that if you don't feel the wound, it means that you have not accepted our common body, our common history. You don't recognize my flesh with your flesh.
Nobody touches me.
But then it goes the other way too. That if you can feel the wound, as if it's on your own body, it means we've become a new people. With a common history and a common flesh and a common destiny.
Well, I think that's what from a personal sense, that's also why, in some ways, it also helps explain why, like for example, immigrants, like my parents, they didn't realize that, like, they thought that, like, because I was explaining to Valerie Russ at the Empire, where she was basically like, why'd you move to Philly? And I was basically like, okay, so my parents are from blah, blah, and then I told her, I was like, I think, for example, at least I can speak for like Chinese immigrants, and it's because it doesn't matter what class you come from. If you come from Chinese civilization, your parents will send you to like the most elite institution you can go to in college. Like you will be going to college, like no matter how hard it's, like no matter what, like you have no choice. And I think in some ways my parents thought that, I think a lot of Chinese parents think that the only dues you have to pay is to them. When really what confused my parents was like, hey, you sent me to Cornell, and actually what you didn't realize is that I was not on my merry way to law school, but there's a trap that all of us face, which is depression. And they're like, my parents used to yell at me. They're like, why are you so depressed? Like, I was in the Cultural Revolution. Like, I saw like teachers, I saw teachers get thrown, like rocks were thrown at them by like kiddos and by the Red Army, whatever, the Red Guard. And they're like, you don't know what it's like to suffer. And I was like, but that's the thing, is actually, they assume that there is whatever, whether you want to call it the American dream or what, but they didn't realize that, like, hey, baby, you moved to the US. And what you didn't realize is that by like giving me American citizenship, I have dues to pay. And it's not to you, actually, and I'm sorry, but it's to my ancestors who are not even like from China, but they're like, their blood is in the soil.
I just wanted to say similarly. So, like, what I'm talking about, the artist, is also something specific in my head, but I didn't say it because, like, I don't want to name names. But basically, my parents are like baby boomers, but I also am, okay, this is something painful because, and I look at Doc because I feel like people who I came up with, their parents were not baby boomers. They were either kids of baby boomers or kids of kids, basically. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, like, what happened also, like, with this terror or this trying to deal with King's death, really.
Right.
Like, really trying to deal with the death of somebody who is keeping this together. Like the fire and everything that it produced. It also produced a variety of different kinds of kids. Like this whole hip hop generation, the hip hop generation also raised people my age. And that means a lot. Like that, and I'm, when I'm talking about the artists, I'm also talking about people who I know. And the things that they have to face because of what you're saying, that the dues that we have to reckon with almost seem insurmountable. Like, I know people having kids, meaning I know a person with a family who is really not that well together, but I guess is a rapper, whatever. But the things that she would say is that, well, this is a time for women because there's no men. The problem is that there's no men, not that women should be men, but if she's having a baby, then what also happens to a lot of things are on the line. And I feel like for a lot of reasons I was particularly blessed, and I say that with a lot of irony because it's so it puts me in a very awkward position of being around and like never being around, or like understandable and really not being understood or whatever. And what happens is that things that are obvious to me are not important. And because what you're saying about paying your dues is not an easy thing to do. Also, when there's a whole broken up line of people who haven't really also been able to reconcile completely with that question. But that also only means is that really paying your dues is the only thing to do. So I wanted to bring that up because what we're faced with is Black people being defensive with their history. What you said is a real thing, because there's been not a lot of way to get through to a person, right? Or even to highlight what's valuable and what's not valuable. And so what happens is that there's a lot of pain that we're all carrying. And what's also important is when people see all of you, like Asians or everybody standing up for Baldwin. Like, people might not say it, or people might say the opposite because it's out of a certain pain. Like, why is it's just you guys and not, like that whole thing about preschool being only Asian and yada 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 yada. They're really saying thank you, but it's hard. So basically with me, what I'm saying about the whole thing about being an artist is that I know that what was right in front of me was something that my parents really, in a sense, gave me, or that, really, Doc, you gave me, because it was what I was looking for to do anyway. But
That is so interesting. Well, something you kind of explained to me, and maybe this is not fully fleshed out, but it's almost like also the formation of preschool and why, like in a way, why it had to be us, because it's like we came in to surrender something or to offer something back. Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'll come back to this idea, but it was like what you said, it helped see.
yeah, not everybody can do it, but everybody is there also.
Not everybody can do it first.
Right, first.
Yeah, anyway. Well, it's 2:00 and
Probably lunchtime.
I think we could end. Okay, thanks to all of our commenters. We love you a lot. And we'll let you know about our virtual reading groups because we would like for all of you to participate, even if you're not in Philly. But we'll let you know about the virtual ones. Reading groups will be like a combo virtual in person with the Unitarians. So
That's one.
oh, I don't know. I just don't. Yeah, there's one in Chicago too that starts Sunday. Tomorrow. But anyways, we're gonna end now.
Bye, guys.
Bye.